Jon Snow awoke before dawn in the modest bedchamber he had claimed in Winterfell. Beneath the thick layers of furs, he felt the encroaching chill that seeped through stone walls older than even the Starks could remember. Though winter's icy wind howled outside, the fire in the hearth had burned low and only faint embers glowed in the darkness. His breath formed soft clouds in the early gloom. He had always found an odd comfort in the cold, but this morning a curious disquiet prickled through him. Some half-remembered dream hovered at the edge of his mind, and he could not shake the feeling that it had been significant. But as he rose, the details slipped away, leaving him with only the faint taste of foreboding. He turned his gaze to Ghost, his dire wolf, curled by the door. Even in sleep, Ghost sensed Jon's unease and lifted his head with silent vigilance, red eyes glinting in the faint glow. Jon slid out of bed and dressed quickly in woolens and leather. He felt a certain restlessness, as if called by something beneath his feet. Winterfell had always been a place of secrets, old crypts, hidden passages, legends as enduring as the walls themselves. Yet now, in the hush before dawn, he sensed more. Was it only the memory of the dream that pulled at him, or something deeper, something real? Resolute in his curiosity, he cinched the belt at his waist, then strapped Longclaw to his hip. The Valyrian steel felt cool and reassuring at his side. He left his chamber quietly, Ghost padding after him without a sound. The corridors were silent but for the whisper of wind against the tower windows. He passed ancient tapestries bearing the dire wolf's sigil, the threads woven dull from centuries of existence. Since the battles and the turmoil of war, Winterfell was far quieter than it had been in its heyday. The household guard was diminished, many of its men either scattered to the winds or fallen in the fight for the North's future. Some parts of the castle lay in partial ruin, scorched by the flames of betrayal, while others had been hastily repaired in the months since. Yet the heart of the castle still felt alive. Torches lined the halls, each casting a small pool of light. Jon descended a flight of steps toward the great hall, only to pause in the gloom. He did not know where he was going, only that something called him downward, farther below. He thought of the crypts, the resting place of the Starks. A memory surfaced of times he had walked those dark corridors as a boy. Perhaps that was what beckoned him. He turned aside, making his way to the courtyard and then toward the entrance of the crypts. The morning air hit him like a slap when he stepped into the courtyard. The sky was still black, but the eastern horizon hinted at gray. Snow drifted lazily. Frost glazed the stone steps that led to the crypt door. Ghost let out a low chuff as Jon pulled the heavy iron handle. The ancient wood groaned open. The darkness within was tangible, a cold even deeper than the winter air outside, as though the crypt itself exhaled a breath of millennia. Jon pulled a torch from the wall sconce and used a flint to light it, the small flame revealing damp stone walls and the descent into history. The stairs wound down in a slow, measured spiral, carrying Jon and Ghost deeper beneath Winterfell. The flickering light of his torch danced along the walls, illuminating cobwebs and drifts of dust. He stepped carefully, mindful of the slick stone. The crypts had always unsettled him in a way he could not fully name, not fear, but a sense of awe and sorrow all at once, as though a piece of him recognized the weight of all that had passed, all that was entombed here. At the base of the stairs, the crypt opened into a broad passage flanked by stone kings and lords of Winterfell, each statue wearing a granite likeness of a dire wolf at its feet. Torches rested in brackets along the walls, but none were lit. His own flame cast eerie shadows on the faces of the lords long gone, whose eyes seemed to watch him pass. He paused before Lord Rickard Stark's statue and thought of Ned Stark, his father in all but name, and the legacy he had left behind. Then he passed onward, deeper. Something still called to him, a pull at the edge of his consciousness. He felt it at the soles of his feet, an insistent whisper guiding him farther. Though he had no plan beyond quiet exploration, he allowed the urging to lead him through passages he scarcely remembered, into corners of the crypt that felt older than the rest. The air grew heavier, thick with the scent of earth and time. The stone underfoot was cracked and worn. Eventually, Jon reached an archway half-choked by rubble, a place seldom visited, if at all. Here, the crypt grew narrower, the walls damp with seepage. It struck him that this section might be part of the original foundations, from before expansions and reconstructions, older by centuries than even the earliest lords whose effigies stood in the more frequented corridors. He slipped through the partially collapsed arch, Ghost behind him. The direwolf's ears were pricked, his hackles raised slightly, and Jon felt a surge of caution. He crouched, pressing the torch ahead of him. The narrow passage twisted left, then right, descending further in steps that were not uniform like the rest. The air felt stale, untouched for ages. At last, the passage widened into a small chamber, more of a pocket in the bedrock than a proper room. The ceiling was low, forcing Jon to stoop slightly. He caught a glimpse of something in the torchlight, an irregular protrusion in the stone. Carefully, he moved closer, the flame revealing a section of carved masonry. A shape had been etched into the rock, a direwolf? Or was it a dragon? The lines were faded, battered by time. Jon let his hand trace the faint engraving. Beneath his fingertips, the stone trembled, or so it seemed, making him jerk back. His heart thudded in his chest. He pressed the torch closer to see more. The carving indeed seemed to depict a large, serpentine creature with wings. There was no mistaking it now, though the details were faint. A swirl of conflicting emotions rose within him. The Starks and dragons in the same breath, deep beneath Winterfell? It made no sense. Yet here it was, etched in stone. He ran his palm over the carving once more. This time, when the stone shifted, he did not pull away. There was a grinding sound deep in the wall. Ghost snarled, his fur bristling, but Jon pressed on the carving with greater force. A slab of ancient masonry slid aside with a groan, revealing a dark recess beyond. A gust of cold, stale air rushed out. The smell was indescribable, dust, old bones, and something faintly metallic. Shifting the torch forward, Jon peered into the hidden cavity. The flicker of flame glinted off something smooth. At first, he thought it was simply polished rock, but as he approached, the shape began to glow with a faint luminescence in the torchlight. His breath caught in his throat when he realized what he saw, an egg, large enough to fill both his hands, with a surface like stone scales, each facet catching the light in swirling blues and silvers. He froze. Tales of dragons and their eggs were the stuff of legend, the stuff of Targaryens, of ancient Valyria. And yet this was real, hidden beneath Winterfell of all places. His mind raced. How long had this been here? Who had placed it? The Targaryens had come to Westeros only a few centuries ago, but Winterfell's foundations were older still, possibly dating back to the first men. He thought of the cryptic stories old Nan used to tell, of ice dragons and secret tunnels. Could it be that in some distant past, someone had hidden this relic here? The air felt electric. He reached out, gingerly cupping the egg in his hands. It was heavier than he expected and surprisingly warm, or was that his imagination? The shell, if it was indeed a shell, felt smooth yet pebbled, like countless small scales fused together. For a moment, a flicker of doubt struck him. If this was truly a dragon egg, was it dormant or dead? Legend claimed that many eggs never hatched, their magic gone cold. But the faint warmth made Jon wonder. His heart pounded. He pictured himself emerging into the courtyard with a dragon egg clutched to his chest. The thought was almost too large to comprehend. Ghost sniffed the air, then let out a soft whine. Jon placed the egg carefully on the ground and stroked the direwolf's fur, quieting him. He considered leaving it. Part of him thought it would be madness to remove such a thing from where it had been hidden, who knew what wards or secrets protected it. But a stronger part of him refused to let it languish in darkness. As if in answer, the egg seemed to pulse in the flickering glow, a subtle play of color across the scales. Jon realized he needed counsel, but from whom? So few people could be trusted with such knowledge. Even among his allies, this was a dangerous secret. He thought of his siblings Sansa, Arya, Bran, and Daenerys. The memory of her name made his throat tighten for reasons both political and personal. Once, her dragons had been the only living ones in the world. If this egg were viable, the implications were too immense to grasp. Softly, he lifted the egg again, tucking it beneath his arm. It felt like holding a small infant, an odd parallel that did not escape him. Ghost led the way as they retraced their steps back through the cramped corridor, past the carved serpentine figure, and into the silent crypt. Jon's mind swirled with possibility, with 1,000 questions. He wanted to run straight to the library, to scour every tome for any hint of the Stark connection to dragons. He wanted to hurry to the maester's chambers to glean knowledge of how to care for a dormant egg. But he dared not do so openly. Not yet. When they reached the upper levels of the crypt, the faint light of morning filtered through the stairwell. He extinguished his torch in a stone basin near the doorway, carefully cradling the egg inside his cloak. He glanced around the courtyard. No one was about this early except a lone guard by the gate, whose attention was mostly on the horizon. He nodded to Jon in passing, no more suspicious of him carrying an odd bundle than if he were just transporting a stack of parchment. Jon crossed the yard with purposeful strides, heart pounding, and slipped inside one of the lesser-used towers. This tower had suffered minor damage in the war but had since been repaired. The rooms were largely empty now, used mostly for storage. Jon found a small chamber near the top, dusty, with a single window that overlooked the practice yards. It would serve as a private place to keep the egg hidden for the moment. He pulled aside a dilapidated trunk, checking its contents, old bed linens, nothing important. Gently, he set the egg inside and covered it with a layer of cloth, forming a makeshift nest. At once he missed the strange warmth in his arms, but he resisted the urge to hold it longer. He needed time to think, time to plan. He left the tower as unobtrusively as he could. By now, the sun had begun its slow climb, painting the sky pale gray. Snow still drifted in lazy spirals. He decided to act as if nothing unusual weighed on his mind, an impossible task, for the enormity of what he'd found made him feel like a man walking in a dream. But he forced himself to maintain composure. He went to the great hall to break his fast. The space was mostly empty at this hour, save for a few early risers. A meager spread awaited brown bread, salted fish, porridge. Jon sat at a bench and spooned porridge into a wooden bowl, hardly tasting it. His gaze drifted over the hall's familiar features, the high beams, the banners of House Stark, the table where his father once sat. Now, he was the guardian of a secret that could reshape history. He thought of Daenerys, how her entire identity was bound up with the legacy of dragons. Then he thought of the North, of old tales hinting that the first Stark lords dealt not only with direwolves, but with other creatures best left to fable. Could that be the origin of the hidden egg? He sensed movement behind him and turned to see Sansa approaching. She looked regal and poised in a warm cloak of gray and white, her red hair braided in a northern style. There was a small furrow of concern on her brow that smoothed itself into a polite smile as she sat across from him. "Up early," she observed, setting her hands delicately on the table. "Any particular reason?" He offered a slight shrug, careful to keep his face neutral. "Bad dreams, I suppose. I went to the crypts." He saw a flicker of sadness in her eyes. "You spend a lot of time there, remembering?" she said softly. "I understand. Sometimes I can't sleep, thinking of everything that's happened." She paused, studying him. "Is that all it is?" "Yes," Jon lied quietly, aware of the slight tremor in his voice. "Just the memories weighing on me." Sansa's lips parted, as though she sensed more behind his words. But she let the moment pass, turning her attention to a servant who refilled their cups. Jon thanked the servant, then took a drink, all the while conscious of how every second of small talk gnawed at his nerves. He was desperate to slip away, to confirm that the egg was safe, but he forced himself to remain. Appearing too anxious would raise suspicions. They spoke of minor matters, preparations for the coming cold, the state of the granaries, the repairs on the outer walls. Even these trivial details reminded Jon how precarious Winterfell's position remained. The realm was still recovering from the fires of war, and the North especially had suffered. Resources were thin, morale was fragile. He questioned how a dragon egg, if it truly were viable, might upend everything for good or ill. The magnitude of it weighed on him with every breath. After breakfast, Jon excused himself. He wanted to consult old records, but not so openly as to draw attention. Instead, he made for the library tower, a quiet place kept by what remained of Maester Luwin's old collection and expanded under Maester Wolkan's care. As he entered the dusty aisles of books and scrolls, the smell of parchment and leather enveloped him. He passed shelves of volumes on ancient houses, on genealogies, on the laws of the Seven Kingdoms. Toward the back, hidden from common view, were older tomes and fragments of manuscripts, including some from the Age of Heroes, or what purported to be from that time. There were also copies of Aegon the Conqueror's accounts, treaties from King Jaehaerys, and bits of Valyrian texts. If there was any clue about a dragon egg in Winterfell, it might be buried here. He lit a small lantern for additional light and began paging through volumes. It was painstaking work. Many of the texts were incomplete or else used archaic language that slowed his progress. Hours slipped by. He found references to dragons that existed in the earliest days of Targaryen rule, stories that certain eggs had been presented as gifts to noble houses or hoarded as curiosities even when they would not hatch. But none of it directly pointed to the north, let alone Winterfell. He did, however, discover one curious excerpt in a worm-eaten volume. Some hold that the deepest foundations of that fortress raised by Brandon the Builder hold secrets from beyond the dawn of men. A rumored beast of scale and shadow kept in crypt labyrinth for an age, though no proof has come to light. The Stark line denies all knowledge, or so it is said. He reread the passage, heart-pounding. Beast of scale and shadow. Could it have referred to a dragon kept long ago? If so, had the creature left behind an egg? Or had an egg been placed there for safekeeping by some unknown guardian? It remained an enigma, but at least it hinted that the idea was not entirely unimaginable. He carefully copied the passage onto a slip of parchment, then continued his search. By midday he found nothing else so promising. Feeling hunger gnaw at him, he closed the book and stretched his stiff neck. He needed a plan. He needed to talk to someone he could trust absolutely. Sansa? Arya? Bran? Each had their strengths and secrets, but also complexities. Arya might swear loyalty to him, but the knowledge might put her in danger. Sansa was wise in the ways of politics, but also weighed every risk. Bran was different now, changed by his powers as the three-eyed raven. If anyone might already know of this egg, it would be Bran. The thought unsettled Jon, but it might be the best way to learn more. He found Bran in the godwood. The ancient weirwood stood silent in the swirling snow, its carved face a witness to countless generations of Starks. Bran sat beneath the heart tree, eyes half closed. He wore a thick cloak, but he did not shiver, as though the cold was a distant concept to him. When Jon approached, Bran lifted his gaze, and his eyes seemed to hold a depth that belied his years. "Jon," he said softly, a trace of sadness or perhaps infinite understanding in his voice. "You came." Jon knelt beside him, searching Bran's features. "You knew I would?" Bran blinked slowly. "Not exactly. But I see possibilities." His voice was distant, as though he spoke from a dream. "You have a secret." A jolt of adrenaline shot through Jon's veins. He drew a sharp breath. "You know." Bran tilted his head. "I saw you in a vision, walking beneath the crypts. I saw you holding something in egg. Its shell shone with a blue light, like moonlight on ice. I didn't understand what it meant. But now you're here." Jon glanced around to ensure they were alone, then leaned in, keeping his voice low. "There's a hidden chamber in the older part of the crypts. I found a dragon egg. Or I believe it's a dragon egg. I don't know what to do with it." Bran nodded as though hearing something he already knew. "Its presence is woven into the histories of this place. Dormant power, waiting to be found. I've glimpsed whispers of the past, so faint it's like seeing shapes in swirling snow." He paused, his expression unreadable. The egg was left there many, many years ago. Jon's heart thudded. He found himself hanging on Bran's every word. By whom? And why? Bran closed his eyes as though listening to distant voices. The wind rustled the branches overhead. "One of your ancestors, Jon? Or perhaps a distant relative through your Targaryen blood. The line between the two is more blurred than you might imagine. Someone believed Winterfell's warmth, the natural hot springs beneath the castle, could preserve or hatch the egg. But they hid it away when the risk became too great." He opened his eyes, fixing Jon with a gaze that felt ancient. "It was meant for a Stark of both ice and fire, a child of two worlds. You." The words sent a tremor through Jon, as though the ground beneath him had shifted. He recalled the revelations about his parentage, the knowledge that he was not Ned Stark's bastard, but rather the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. Ice and fire. The phrase resonated, and the egg's swirling coloration now felt like a reflection of that union. "What am I meant to do with it?" "I cannot tell you your destiny," Bran replied softly. "Only that the egg is part of it. If it can hatch, you may find yourself holding unimaginable power that could help protect the realm, or drive it into chaos. Your heart must guide you." Jon's breath came faster. The memory of Daenerys and her dragons flashed in his mind, the awe and fear they inspired. "I don't want to cause more chaos. The realm has suffered enough." Bran placed a hand on Jon's forearm. Though Bran's body was frail, his touch carried a quiet strength. Yet a dragon, if guided by compassio and wisdom, could protect the north from new threats. "Winter is not over, Jon. There are things older and colder than we can guess." The long night was but one chapter of a greater story. Jon exhaled, feeling the weight settle on him. The idea of a new dragon, a northern dragon bound to a Stark Targaryen, it was both wondrous and terrifying. "I'll keep it hidden for now. At least until I can be sure of what to do." Bran nodded. "Follow your instincts, but know that events set in motion have a way of reaching their conclusion, whether we will it or not." A pause, and a flicker of what might have been sorrow crossed Bran's face. "Be careful, Jon. There are others who would stop at nothing to claim or destroy such an egg." Jon swallowed hard, recalling how fiercely enemies had pursued Daenerys' dragons. He could not let that happen here. With a final nod, he gripped Bran's hand in silent gratitude, then rose. As he walked away from the godwood, the swirling snow and the silent face of the weirwood seemed to watch him go, a mute witness to whatever destiny lay ahead. That night, sleep eluded Jon. He found himself pacing his chamber, unable to banish the swirl of thoughts about the egg. At last, he left the relative warmth of his bed and wrapped himself in a thick cloak, intending to check on the egg's hiding place once more. Ghost followed without a sound as Jon made his way through Winterfell's corridors, past dozing guards and darkened archways. The hush of the hour made the castle feel more ancient than ever, the ghost of every ancestor drifting in the corners of his vision. When he reached the tower's small chamber, he paused to listen. No sound from within. Slipping inside, he shut the door behind him, breathing a small sigh of relief that everything seemed undisturbed. The old trunk was where he'd left it, covered in a film of dust that had settled anew since morning. He knelt, lifted the creaky lid, and carefully drew away the cloth. The egg looked the same, yet not. In the moonlight that poured through the narrow window, its scales reflected a new pattern of colors as though faint waves of silver and sapphire rippled across the shell. He touched it gently. Was it warmer than before? The thought sent a thrill of awe through him. He sat there, cross-legged, the egg in his lap, listening to the night wind. He recalled Daenerys describing how she had hatched her eggs in fire, how she had walked into the flames. That had taken powerful magic, a unique confluence of blood and prophecy. Could it be done again? He knew so little about such magic. Still, the hush of the room felt charged, as though something slumbered inside the shell, something that stirred at his presence. Ice and fire, Bran had said. A child of both worlds. Jon wondered what that truly meant. His reflection in the egg's surface showed a man caught between destinies, never fully one or the other. In a moment of impulse, he leaned down and whispered softly, "If you live in there, know that I will not abandon you. I am of the North, a Stark by heart and of Targaryen blood by birth. Perhaps together we'll find our place." The words sounded foolish, and he felt heat rise to his cheeks, even though no one was there to hear him except Ghost, who watched calmly from the corner. But somehow speaking them aloud felt right. For the next few days, Jon carried on a delicate charade. By day, he attended to his duties, overseeing the training of the castle guards, checking on provisions, meeting with northern lords to maintain alliances. He listened to Arya's latest stories of her travels, smiled at Sansa's strategies for strengthening the north, and shared silent moments with Bran, whose far-seeing eyes betrayed no further revelations. By night, however, Jon spent hours in the tower, studying the egg by candlelight. He brought heated bricks to keep the chamber warm, reminiscent of how Daenerys's eggs had needed heat. He even set small braziers in the corners, hoping to increase the temperature enough to stir the egg's latent life. He told no one else of his secret, not even Arya, though her keen gaze often lingered on him as if sensing something was amiss. He had no choice. The fewer who knew, the safer they would be. The knowledge was a burden, but one he chose to bear alone. He scoured the old texts in the library, searching for any mention of how to hatch a dragon in the cold north, but references were sparse and contradictory. Some insisted that only extreme heat could awaken a dragon egg, that the living fire of a dragon mother was necessary. Others hinted that certain old magics, combined with the unique geothermal warmth beneath Winterfell, might suffice. And so the days passed, each one increasing his anxiety. He felt as though he was on the verge of something monumental, yet stuck in a cycle of secrecy. He could not deny a growing connection to the egg itself. When he touched it, an echo of warmth pulsed beneath his fingertips, and sometimes he imagined he felt movement inside. If it truly was stirring, it was a slow, uncertain process. Perhaps it would remain dormant forever. At times, the weight of potential failure bore down on him just as heavily as the fear of success. 3 weeks after his discovery, in the dead of night, Jon was in the hidden chamber, carefully turning the egg as best he could. If he recalled Daenerys's recollections correctly, eggs needed rotation. A swirl of light from his lantern glanced over the shell, revealing a faint flicker. Suddenly, Ghost let out a low growl, his posture alert. Jon whipped around, hand on Longclaw's hilt. The door stood closed, but he sensed a presence. He moved to the door in 2 strides, flung it open, and found Arya standing there, silent as a shadow, eyes bright with curiosity and suspicion. "Jon," she said quietly, glancing past him into the chamber. "What are you doing in here?" His mind raced. He didn't want to lie to her, not Arya, whose bond with him had always been so strong. She stepped forward, her gaze flicking to the trunk in the center of the room, to the braziers, to the egg clutched against Jon's chest. A sharp intake of breath told him she recognized it as something extraordinary. "Close the door," he said softly. She did, and then they stood face to face in the dim lantern light, Ghost watching with his crimson eyes. Arya's voice trembled with a mixture of excitement and fear. "Is that—" He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Slowly, almost reverently, Arya stepped closer to examine the egg. She reached out a hand as if to touch it, then paused, looking to Jon for permission. He gave a curt nod. Her fingertips brushed the shell and her eyes widened. Gods, it's warm. Jon, how aware? He ushered her away from the doorway. I found it in a hidden chamber beneath the crypts. I don't fully understand how it came to be here. Bran told me that it might be meant for me. That it's tied to my lineage. Arya's gaze snapped up, meeting his. Your Targaryen side. She swallowed hard, her expression conflicted. Jon, do you know what this means? Dragons in the north, the lords would go mad if they found out. And what about it? I know, he cut in, voice hushed. That's why I've kept it secret. I need time. I don't want to cause chaos, but if this dragon can be hatched, it might protect us. Bran said there are threats still lurking beyond our sight. Arya was silent a moment, then she let out a shaky laugh. You always find the greatest burdens, don't you, Jon Snow? She sobered, her tone becoming earnest. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. You're my brother. Stark, Targaryen, none of that changes who you are to me. A wave of relief washed over Jon. He realized how desperately he had needed a confidant. Thank you, Arya. He turned his gaze back to the egg. I'm trying to hatch it, though I'm not sure how. Arya cocked her head, that determined, mischievous look lighting her eyes. Daenerys used fire. But the north doesn't have the same kind of heat. We have the hot springs. Could they be enough? That's one idea, Jon admitted. I was considering moving the egg to a place where the castle's warmth runs strongest. Perhaps in the crypts themselves, there are pockets of geothermal heat. But it's dangerous and prying eyes might notice. Arya's lips twitched in a half-smile. We're good at avoiding prying eyes. She touched the hilt of the small blade at her waist. I can help keep watch. With that, a plan began to take shape. Over the next few nights, Jon and Arya worked in secret. Using Arya's knowledge of hidden corridors and the candlelit paths she had explored in her youth, they transported the egg to an abandoned subchamber near one of the hot springs. The passages were damp and slick, but the air was noticeably warmer than in the rest of Winterfell. There, in the bowels of the castle's foundation, the hot water coursed through ancient channels. They found a nook off a corridor so little used it had half collapsed. Within, a small natural basin of steaming water had formed. Jon and Arya built a bed of stone and gravel above the water's surface, then placed the egg upon it, surrounded by heated stones and a ring of torches kept perpetually lit. The whole process had to be done stealthily, step by step, so as not to draw suspicion. By day, they continued their normal lives. By night, they slipped below to tend to the egg, carefully checking for any signs of change. At first, nothing happened. Days turned to a week, then two. The egg stayed the same, though Jon fancied it felt incrementally warmer. He told himself to be patient. Daenerys's eggs had taken a specific confluence of events to hatch. Perhaps more was needed than just heat. He tried whispering old Targaryen words, though he only knew a handful of High Valyrian phrases from reading. He tried remembering the old prayers to the old gods. Nothing obvious changed. All the while, tensions in Winterfell began to rise. A letter arrived from one of the northern houses, warning of renewed raids beyond the wall. The wildlings were not to blame, according to Tormund, who had visited. He spoke of monstrous creatures, rumors of leftover remnants from the wars with the undead, pockets of horrors that refused to die. Jon felt a chill at the idea. Could it be the White Walkers again? That was supposed to be done. But if a fraction of that threat remained, a new dragon might indeed be crucial for the North's survival. Then a messenger came from the south, bearing news that certain lords loyal to Queen Daenerys, those who had once supported her claim, were uneasy about the North's growing autonomy. They worried that Jon, who had publicly relinquished his own claim, might still be a figure around whom rebels could rally. Rumors of his Targaryen blood had never fully died. It was a precarious political position. The last thing the realm needed was another war. Jon grit his teeth. If word of a new dragon egg leaked, it could spark all-out chaos. Claimants and enemies would converge on Winterfell like crows to a corpse. Secrecy was paramount. One evening, Arya rushed into Jon's chamber, eyes wide. Jon, come. Something's happening. Her voice shook with barely contained excitement. He needed no further prompting. Grabbing his cloak, he followed her through the winding corridors down to the hidden subchamber. The air there was thick with steam, the torches flickering in the damp. As soon as Jon stepped in, he felt the difference. The egg's surface was aglow with a soft, pulsing light. Faint cracks traced along its scales. He crouched, heart hammering. Arya hovered at his side, hands clasped tightly. A faint sound, like a muffled heartbeat, came from within the shell. Jon leaned closer, scarcely breathing. The glow from the egg pulsed rhythmically, and the cracks widened. The moment felt unreal, as though they stood in an ancient tale. Then a piece of the shell chipped away, tumbling onto the stone. A glowing steam rose from the break. The entire egg lurched as if something inside struggled to emerge. Arya gasped softly. Jon found himself trembling. He reached out with a gloved hand, gently touching the egg's surface. "Easy," he whispered. "We're here." The shell cracked again, splitting further. Through the gaps, Jon glimpsed movement, a small, scaled limb, then the hint of a slender neck. In a sudden rush, the top of the shell broke open, releasing a burst of heat and a shimmering cloud of vapor. Jon and Arya recoiled slightly. When the air cleared, a tiny creature lay amidst the shards, glistening wet. Its skin was a mottled mixture of pale silver and deep charcoal with faint blue undertones. Delicate wings unfurled, each membrane laced with veins that shimmered. The creature's eyes snapped open, icy blue yet flecked with a fiery orange at the center. It let out a tiny squeak, somewhere between a mewl and a hiss. Jon felt an overpowering sense of awe. A living, breathing dragon. Born here in the cold heart of the north, from an ancient egg hidden beneath Winterfell. He extended his hand, palm open. The hatchling blinked, then stretched its neck forward. Its head was about the size of his fist, topped with small, serrated horns. Slowly, carefully, it nudged Jon's palm, letting out a soft chirp. Arya covered her mouth. "Gods," she breathed, her eyes shining with wonder. "It's smaller than I thought it would be, but so alive." Jon's voice caught in his throat. "It's a new life. A northern dragon." He was suddenly overwhelmed by the responsibility he now held. A creature of legend, newly hatched, reliant on him. He scooped it gently into his arms. The dragon trembled, pressing against the warmth of his body. Its scales were slippery, still moist from the egg. A wave of tenderness washed over Jon, unlike anything he had known, a protective instinct so strong it clenched his heart. For a moment, the dragon coughed, then a tiny flicker of blue-tinged flame sparked from its jaws. Arya jumped back with a laugh of surprise. Jon, stunned, watched the flame vanish almost as quickly as it had appeared. This was no ordinary dragon. Its flame glinted like cold fire, reminiscent of moonlight on ice. In the days that followed, Jon and Arya devoted themselves to caring for the hatchling. They kept it hidden in the subchamber, away from all prying eyes, bringing it scraps of meat, lighting more braziers to maintain warmth. They learned quickly that the hatchling was fiercely intelligent but also fragile in these early stages. It cried out for attention, for warmth, for more food. Jon felt more than once that it recognized him on some fundamental level. When he approached, its little wings flapped excitedly and it made chirping sounds until he scooped it up. Each time he cradled it, his chest flooded with a strange mixture of love, awe, and responsibility. Arya was equally fascinated, often coaxing the dragon to follow her finger or chase a piece of string. She giggled in delight when it nipped at the air or produced the faintest wisp of that peculiar flame. But they remained cautious, knowing the slightest slip could reveal their secret. The hatchling was not yet large enough to wander much, but its strength grew daily. They had to plan carefully how to keep it quiet, especially as it began to make louder vocalizations when hungry. One night, Jon brought a larger portion of raw meat, courtesy of the kitchens. He set it down in front of the dragon, who pounced on it and tore at it with surprisingly sharp teeth. Watching the creature feed, Jon couldn't help thinking ahead, how large would it grow? Would it rival Daenerys' dragons? Or was its nature different, shaped by the North's cooler climate? The old stories of ice dragons flitted through his mind, but those were said to be made of living ice, exhaling cold. This hatchling seemed to breathe flame, albeit a flame tinted by azure light. Perhaps it was a hybrid of myth and flesh, of ice and fire, just like Jon himself. The thought both thrilled and frightened him. With each passing day, the dragon grew. Its once soft scales hardened, taking on a sleek sheen that caught the torchlight in shimmering blues and silvers. Tiny ridges formed along its spine. Its eyes lost some of the orange tint, settling into a deeper, striking blue. It tested its wings in short, flapping bursts, once even lifting off the ground for a heartbeat span before tumbling back down in a flurry of squeaks. During this period, Jon found himself increasingly pulled in other directions. Reports of troubles beyond the wall grew more alarming, with sightings of strange, undead creatures rumored to roam the snows. If a new threat was rising, Jon's place was to protect the realm. And now he had a secret weapon in the making. If he could keep the dragon alive and healthy, it might be the deciding factor. But he also knew how precarious the situation was. The more time passed, the more likely someone would notice their frequent disappearances beneath the castle. More than once, Sansa questioned why he and Arya kept vanishing, but Arya deflected with witty remarks and Jon pretended he was investigating structural issues in the lower levels. He confided briefly in Bran, who nodded gravely. Everything is happening as it must. The new threat stirs and so does your dragon. But be wary, others sense the shifting of powers. Indeed, trouble arrived in the form of a southern visitor. Ser Mathis Caro, a knight loyal to certain ambitious lords, came unannounced to Winterfell under the guise of reinforcing alliances. Sansa greeted him politely, but the man seemed far too inquisitive for Jon's liking. He asked about the state of the castle's repairs, about the crypts, about rumored hot springs. Each question felt like a probe. Jon maintained a guarded front, suspecting the knight had come searching for evidence of Targaryen secrets. Could he have heard rumors of a hidden dragon egg? Fearing exposure, Jon and Arya doubled their caution. They avoided the subchamber when Ser Mathis was about and only snuck down late at night. They arranged for additional illusions of normalcy, spending more time training in the courtyard by day. But tension coiled like a wire in Jon's gut. The slightest slip could bring down a legion of spies. And each day, the dragon grew louder, bolder. Hiding it in the half-collapsed chamber would soon become untenable. They needed a new plan, somewhere safer to keep it or perhaps to move it away from Winterfell entirely. But how? Late one night, as the winds howled outside, Jon stood by the dragon, stroking its neck. The hatchling chirped contentedly, pressing its scaled head against his chest. In a moment of calm, he whispered, "What do I call you?" The creature's eyes flicked open, bright as sapphires. In the old tongue, the name for winter storms was Hronda, but that seemed unwieldy. He thought of the swirling shapes the dragon's flames sometimes took, flickers like dancing auroras. Then he recalled an old story of a dire wolf goddess, but that too felt off. Arya once mentioned ice storm, but that sounded too harsh, too common. The dragon gazed at him as if waiting. Jon exhaled, letting his mind wander. The union of ice and fire, the hush of cold nights, the spark of living flame. A name surfaced in his mind, Frostfire. It seemed to resonate, capturing the dual nature that defined both him and this remarkable being. He said it aloud. Frostfire. The dragon chirped, flaring its wings with a soft rustle. Jon smiled, feeling a kinship he never thought possible. We'll walk this path together. But the path would not be simple. Just 3 days later, disaster nearly struck. Jon and Arya were tending to Frostfire when they heard footsteps echoing in the corridor. They doused the torches and crow. Uchade behind a fallen pillar. The dragon cradled in Jon's arms, Arya's hand on her blade. Light flickered against the damp stone walls, and they saw Ser Mathis pass by with a guard, peering intently at every nook. Jon's heart hammered. One misstep, and the knight would catch a glimpse of their secret. The smell of the braziers and the remains of meat scraps was faint but present. If Ser Mathis was sharp, he might notice something amiss. However, after a tense minute, he moved on, cursing the dank halls and muttering something about fool's tales. Jon and Arya stayed hidden until the echoes of his footsteps faded. When they emerged, hearts still pounding, they exchanged a worried glance. This was too close. If Ser Mathis discovered them, it wouldn't be just him they'd have to worry about. He would report to his southern allies, and soon an army might come knocking to claim or destroy the last dragon. Later that night, Jon called a quiet council in his chambers with Arya, Sansa, and Bran. He revealed the existence of Frostfire. Sansa's eyes widened, and she looked as though all breath had been snatched from her lungs. A dragon in Winterfell. Jon, how could you keep this from me? But the hurt in her voice gave way to understanding when he explained the danger, the risk of betrayal, and his uncertain role in the future. She sank onto a bench, pressing her hands to her temples. This is monumental. Bran remained calm, as though he had expected it. The secret won't keep much longer. We must decide on a course of action. Arya stood by Jon, arms folded. Ser Mathis snoops around day and night. It's only a matter of time before he stumbles on the truth. Jon met Sansa's gaze. We need a safe place for Frostfire, somewhere beyond the immediate reach of prying eyes. Perhaps beyond the wall with Tormund and the Free Folk, or somewhere deep in the mountains of the west. Sansa looked uneasy. Exiling the dragon might provoke rumors of what we're hiding. And how would you keep it fed? A growing dragon needs vast amounts of meat. In the far north, there's little enough game as it is. Bran interjected. The question is not just about hiding. If the threat beyond the wall is rising, you might need Frostfire to confront it. His distant gaze settled on Jon. And if you take the dragon away, you lose the advantage of Winterfell's natural warmth. An impasse. They debated in hushed voices, weighing the risks of staying against the dangers of leaving. In the end, no perfect solution emerged. Sansa promised to divert Ser Mathis's attention, perhaps sending him on a diplomatic errand to White Harbor. That might buy time. Jon resolved to train Frostfire more intensively, teaching the dragon to follow him, to keep silent when needed, to move stealthily through the castle's many hidden ways. The next weeks tested them all. Sansa deftly orchestrated a reason for Ser Mathis to travel south again, dispatching him with a company of men to inspect trade routes along the eastern coast. Her polite smile masked the tension beneath the surface, and he left, though not without casting suspicious glances over his shoulder. Meanwhile, Jon dedicated every free moment to Frostfire's development. He fed the dragon larger meals, took it for cautious flights in the largest underground spaces, taught it to recognize his calls. The bond between them deepened. In quiet moments, Frostfire nestled its head against Jon's chest, purring with a soft rumble. Jon sometimes wondered if the creature read his emotions the way Ghost did. The direwolf, for his part, kept a respectful distance but never showed aggression toward the dragon. On the contrary, Ghost often guarded the entrances whenever Jon was with Frostfire, as if recognizing the dragon as part of their pack. But tension mounted outside the castle walls. Scouts reported an increasing presence of reanimated beasts in the far north, dead bears, a giant scene trudging aimlessly through the snowfields. While the main threat of the White Walkers had been quelled, pockets of necromantic magic seemed to persist. Tales whispered that an evil spirit might be stirring in the Frostfangs, rallying the remnants of the undead. Jon felt the old dread return. The realm had already paid such a high price to defeat the Night King. How could it be that another wave of darkness threatened them? One dawn, Tormund himself arrived at Winterfell's gates, his broad face grim. "I've seen it with my own eyes," he told Jon in the courtyard. "Ice whites that don't stay down. We burned them, yet some rose again in the night, as if they're cursed beyond the old magic." He spat. "We need help. More men, weapons. Maybe the men of the south have grown lazy, but the free folk won't sit idle while an army of dead rears its head again." Jon felt the coil of fear tighten around his heart. The last war had nearly broken them. Another might shatter the fragile peace. "You'll have it," he promised. "But, Tormund, there's something else." He hesitated, glancing around. "Not here. Let's speak privately." He took Tormund to a secluded corner of the courtyard, careful that no one lingered within earshot. There, Jon revealed the existence of Frostfire, explaining how he had hatched a dragon in secret, how it might be the key to confronting the undead. Tormund's eyes grew round as horned moons, and he let out a long whistle. "A dragon, eh? The bastards with blue eyes won't like that one bit," he said with a toothy grin. "So you plan to bring that fire-breather up north to roast the dead again?" Jon exhaled. "If I must. But it's young Tormund. Not yet strong enough for full battle. We have to buy time and keep it a secret from the rest of the realm, or we risk more bloodshed. If the unscrupulous discover a new dragon, they'll come for it." Tormund nodded. I see the trouble. But if these rumors of undead rising again are true, we might not have the luxury of time." He clapped Jon on the shoulder. "Still, I stand with you, Snow. The dragon is yours to command, but if you need the free folk to help keep it safe, you only have to ask." That night, Jon returned to Frostfire's hidden chamber, restless and torn. The dragon, now the size of a large dog, greeted him with a soft rumble, flaring its wings in excitement. Its eyes sparkled as it nudged Jon's arm. Tormund's words weighed heavily on him. If the undead threat grew urgent, he might have to deploy Frostfire sooner than was wise, potentially risking the dragon's life. A half-grown dragon was still a formidable weapon, but also more vulnerable. Yet to sit idle was to risk letting the undead spread unchecked. Winterfell could become the center of another cataclysmic battle. Jon ran his hand along Frostfire's neck, feeling the ridges of scales. The dragon let out a low purr as if sensing Jon's turmoil. "We'll figure it out," he whispered. Over the following weeks, news from the far north turned grimmer. Tormund led scouting parties to push back the undead, but each skirmish revealed more pockets of whites, wolves, bears, even a few human corpses reanimated in the storm. Rumors spread through the castle, and though Jon and his allies tried to keep morale high, whispers of a returning long night began to circulate. The memory of that apocalyptic struggle was too fresh, it haunted every corner of Winterfell. Many nights, Jon stared at the horizon from the battlements, ghosts of the past swirling in his mind. He could almost see the fiery silhouettes of Daenerys' dragons from the last war, hear the screams, feel the cold. He recalled how a single misstep could bring ruin. At last, the day came when Tormund arrived with urgent tidings. They're massing near the gorge, Snow, he said grimly, slamming a fist on the map spread across a table in Winterfell's great hall. Sansa, Arya, and a few northern lords stood in a tense half-circle. We counted dozens, maybe hundreds of whites. It's like some new dark magic is drawing them together. Jon's jaw set. We can't let them cross south. We have to meet them at the gorge. The lords muttered among themselves, anxiety playing on their faces. Sansa's gaze flicked to Jon. We'll send men, but they need leadership. I'll go, Jon said without hesitation. The old fury rose in him, the protective anger at seeing the living threatened by the undead again. Arya, you stay here to protect Winterfell with Sansa. Tormund, your free folk will join the northern host. We'll hold them at the gorge. He paused, his gaze shifting to the window beyond which Frostfire remained hidden. I'll bring the dragon. A shocked murmur rippled through the gathering. Arya's eyes narrowed, her posture tense. Jon, are you sure? Frostfire's young. You could lose him if the fighting is fierce. Jon nodded grimly. I know. But we can't afford half measures. Even a young dragon might tip the balance, especially if the enemy is relying on fear. Fire is the best weapon against the dead. If we succeed quickly, we end this threat before it spreads further. If we wait until Frostfire is grown, we might face an army unstoppable by any means. Sansa pressed her lips together. Then do what you must. But be careful, Jon. That afternoon, as preparations for the march north began, Jon slipped away to gather Frostfire. The dragon, sensing Jon's tension, paced the chamber with restless movements. It had grown taller, its wings more powerful. Jon retrieved a specially crafted leather harness he had asked a discreet blacksmith to make under false pretenses. He'd claimed it was for a large hound. He approached Frostfire and spoke soothingly. The dragon lowered its head, allowing him to slip the harness around its neck and chest. It wouldn't be enough for full flight with Jon astride. Frostfire wasn't big enough to carry him yet, but it would help guide the dragon in battle, give Jon some measure of control if he had to hold on, even briefly. He led Frostfire through a maze of corridors, Ghost trotting beside them. They emerged in a deserted courtyard, their presence concealed by the late afternoon shadows. There, a small group of trusted soldiers waited, along with Tormund. The men looked on in awe as the dragon emerged, stretching its wings in the open air for the first time. Gasps and muttered exclamations of "Gods be good" rippled through them. Tormund grinned widely, though a flicker of apprehension crossed his face. This was no ordinary fight. They were heading to a confrontation with the undead, armed with an untested dragon and uncertain hope. Jon swung himself onto a horse, while Frostfire, following his commands, took flight in short bursts, gliding above them or scampering alongside the group. The beast's wings spanned several yards now, strong enough to carry it for brief flights but not extended journeys. The small host of men, around 200 strong, set out northward from Winterfell, determined to meet the undead threat head-on. As they traveled, they kept to back roads, avoiding any southern visitors who might catch sight of the dragon. Despite the gravity of their mission, Jon felt a surge of pride each time Frostfire soared overhead, if only for a few hundred feet before landing again. The dragon's grace in the air was breathtaking, even in its youth. Sunlight glinted off the silver-blue scales, and each beat of its wings produced a gust of cold wind. Yet the flame that flickered in its belly was anything but cold. Jon sensed that much. The men murmured in awe, half terrified, half mesmerized. Days later, they neared the gorge. The wind had grown sharper, the terrain more forbidding. They established a camp within a shallow ravine, using the natural rock formations as shelter. Scouts were dispatched, returning that evening with grim news. The undead host was larger than expected, perhaps 200 or 300 strong. Tormund spit into the snow. We'll match them in numbers at least. But who knows what dark magic they carry? Jon's face was set. We have to destroy them decisively. If even a few escape, they could swell their ranks again. We won't get a second chance. They devised a plan. At dawn, they would position archers on higher ground. Tormund's free folk would form the first line, the northern soldiers behind them. Jon would hold Frostfire in reserve until the crucial moment. The dragon's flame could scatter the whites, allowing the men to cut them down. It was a risk, but none saw a better option. Dawn broke cold and gray. The small army marched to the mouth of the gorge, forming ranks in the swirling snow. Frostfire paced at Jon's side, occasionally lifting off to hover, then landing again. The tension was palpable. Jon drew long claw, the Valyrian steel shining in the wintry light. He looked across the gathered fighters, hardened faces, men who had survived the last war, and some fresh recruits steeling themselves for their first real taste of the undead. Ghost prowled near Jon, silent as death. Suddenly, a low moan drifted across the field. Then they appeared, skeletal forms shambling through the snow, some in tattered furs, others in armor crusted with ice. Whites. Their eyes glowed with that hateful blue. Behind them came larger shapes, an undead bear, claws black with corruption, and two giant whites lumbering in the rear. Jon's heart thundered. The men muttered curses and prayers, raising their weapons. Frostfire let out a keening growl, wings half unfurled. The whites charged, a ragged horde of snapping jaws and outstretched hands. Tormund roared a battle cry, and the free folk rushed to meet the threat. The clash was immediate and brutal. Steel met rotting flesh, bones snapped, and shrieks filled the air. The northern archers loosed volleys of arrows, some tipped with dragoglass. Many whites fell, but just as many pressed forward, relentless in their undead hunger. Jon stood back for the moment, channeling the fiery tension in his chest into clarity. He could see pockets of whites threatening to overwhelm Tormund's line. With a decisive move, Jon spurred his horse forward. "Now, Frostfire," he shouted. The dragon responded, launching into the air. Snow whirled around them as Frostfire soared above the battlefield. Jon could see the chaos below, men shouting, whites shrieking. The giant whites advanced, crushing anything in their path. With a roar that belied its young size, Frostfire unleashed a plume of shimmering flame. The bluish fire cascaded over the front ranks of the undead, incinerating them in an instant. Charred bones fell into blackened snow. A ripple of shock tore through the remaining whites. Frostfire circled, unleashing another blast that set the undead bear ablaze. It collapsed in a writhing heap, howling in an unearthly scream. A cheer rose from the northern lines, but the battle was far from over. More whites surged around, flanking the men. Frostfire dove raking its claws through a cluster of undead, scattering them. Jon pressed forward, Longclaw flashing as he cut down white after white, each blow guided by a grim determination. Beside him, Tormund swung a massive axe, bellowing with wild fury. The snow became a churning sea of limbs and steel, the air heavy with the stench of death. Suddenly, one of the giant whites tore through the lines, sending men flying. It raised a club fashioned from a tree trunk, eyes blazing with necrotic power. Frostfire swooped in, but the giant swung the club, catching the dragon midair. Frostfire tumbled, letting out a screech of pain as it crashed into a snowbank. A cry caught in Jon's throat. He fought his way toward the downed dragon, hacking at whites that lunged at him. The giant advanced, preparing to crush Frostfire under its massive foot. Jon threw himself forward, rage pulsing in his veins. He slashed at the giant's ankle with Longclaw, severing tendons. The giant staggered. Frostfire, wounded but alive, rolled onto its feet, eyes blazing with fury. With a roar, it loosed a concentrated burst of flame at the giant's head. The undead creature's skull ignited, and it toppled backward with a thunderous crash, disintegrating in a torrent of foul smoke. Across the field, the second giant white rampaged, but Tormund and a group of free folk overwhelmed it with dragon glass spears, shattering its icy form. One by one, the whites fell to steel, fire, or dragonflame. Bit by bit, the horde's relentless surge slowed. The men pressed forward, cutting them down until finally the last reanimated corpse collapsed, the blue glow in its eyes extinguished. The silence that followed was broken only by ragged breathing and the crackle of dying flames. The snow was stained black with soot and red with blood. Bodies, both living and undead, littered the ground. Frostfire lay in the snow, breathing heavily, a gash along its flank. Jon rushed to the dragon, dropping to his knees. "Frostfire," he murmured, panic rising. The dragon lifted its head weakly, blinking. It recognized him, nudging his hand with a soft whine. Relief flooded Jon. He gently placed a hand on the dragon's wound, feeling the slick warmth of blood. It was not fatal, but it needed care. Men gathered around, staring in awe at the beast that had helped turn the tide. Tormund spat on the body of a fallen white, then grinned broadly at Jon. "Your dragon fights like a true Northman," he said, panting. "I'd raise a cup to that." Despite the pain and the carnage, Jon allowed himself a grim smile. They had won. The undead threat here, at least, was vanquished. But he also saw the cost. Several of their men lay dead or wounded, and Frostfire bore a painful gash. The price of battling such abominations was always steep. Yet the presence of a dragon, even a young one, had proven decisive, as if fulfilling the promise of ice and fire united. He looked up at the bleak sky, the wind whipping his hair. The future remained uncertain. There would be other battles, other foes. But for now, for this brief moment, he allowed himself to feel hope. Frostfire was alive. The dead were vanquished here. And the North still stood, guarded by a Stark who was not wholly Stark, and a dragon who was neither purely fire nor purely ice, but something in between, something new. Jon stroked the dragon's neck. "Rest now," he whispered. In Frostfire's shimmering eyes, he thought he saw understanding, gratitude, and a fierce spark of loyalty. Together, they had won this fight. Together, they would face whatever storm the future brought, be it from the coldest reaches of winter or the embers of a smoldering past. As the men set about tending the wounded and burning the remains of the whites, Jon guided Frostfire to a sheltered area under a rocky overhang. A makeshift healer among the free folk helped him clean and bandage the dragon's injury. Throughout the process, Frostfire remained strangely still, as though trusting Jon entirely. The bond between them, forged in secrecy beneath Winterfell, had been tempered in the fires of battle. Now, as they stood amid the drifting snow, Jon realized that this was only the beginning. The realm would soon learn that dragons were not as extinct as they believed. And if the realm learned of it, so would its many ambitious lords and ladies, so would its enemies. The next conflict might come not from the undead, but from those living who coveted or feared the return of the dragon. There were no easy answers. But Jon knew one thing for certain: he would guard Frostfire, this living symbol of his own dual heritage, with every ounce of strength and honor in his body. And if, one day, the realm called upon them to defend the living against darkness once more, Jon Snow and his northern dragon would answer that call. Even as night fell over the icy battlefield, a new flame burned steadily in the north, not the destructive wildfire of war, but the quiet promise of hope carried on the wings of a dragon whose heart beat in harmony with Winterfell's ancient soul. And in that solitary glow, Jon Snow, neither bastard nor king, but a man bound by duty to both ice and fire, found a renewed sense of purpose. The north had gained a guardian unlike any other, and he would see to it that Frostfire's roar echoed across the winds for generations to come. Jon Snow lingered beneath the overhang while the remnants of his forces finished cleaning the battlefield. A frosty wind combed through the gorge, rattling the bare branches of stunted trees, carrying the faint stench of charred undead. Overhead, slate-gray clouds churned in an endless sky, and beyond the jagged pass, the ground was littered with shards of bone and frozen limbs. The moans and shrieks of the whites had finally ceased, but their echo seemed to cling to the barren slopes like a malevolent presence. He crouched beside Frostfire, gingerly running his fingers along the dragon's scales near the wounded flank. The bandages that Tormund's makeshift healer had fashioned were holding, but dark blood still oozed in places, staining the snow. Frostfire's sides rose and fell in shallow breaths. Each exhalation misted the air with a faint bluish glow, a telltale sign of the creature's unusual nature, caught between ice and fire. Jon felt a surge of protectiveness that he had rarely known, even in the thickest of battles. He had loved his siblings, his friends, his fellow brothers of the Night's Watch, but this new bond stood apart, instinctual, primal, something formed between man and dragon in the moment of the hatchling's birth. Frostfire blinked, lids sliding over large sapphire eyes that glimmered with intelligence. When it saw Jon watching, it made a low, comforting rumble and let its head droop against Jon's leg. He rested a hand gently over the dragon's muzzle. "We'll get you back to Winterfell," Jon whispered. "We'll see that wound tended properly. We'll make sure you heal." Behind him, Tormund and a few of the northern soldiers approached with respectful caution. Tormund's thick red beard was crusted with ice and soot, and a savage grin still lingered on his face. "I don't know that I'll ever get used to that beast," he said, nodding toward Frostfire. "But I'll not deny that fire of his turned the tide." A tall, stoop-shouldered man from the Umber clan spoke up. "We lost fewer than I feared. Maybe 24 men? Could have been far worse with so many whites." Jon nodded. "A high price, though still too high. We'll burn the dead, our own, and the whites. We can't risk them turning again. Then we head back." They separated to carry out his instructions. Jon stayed with Frostfire, stroking the dragon's neck, waiting for the men to gather enough wood and oil. The smell of pitch soon permeated the air as pyres were hastily constructed. Ghost appeared from behind a tumble of boulders, carrying in his jaws the remnants of a white severed arm. Jon grimaced, calling the direwolf to heel. Ghost dropped the horrid trophy and padded over, pressed his muzzle to Jon's free hand. For a moment, Jon thought of how all his life he had struggled with a sense of belonging, first as a bastard in Winterfell, then as a brother of the Night's Watch, later as king in the north, and then as a man without a crown. Yet here he knelt, flanked by two creatures who knew him as well as any could, a direwolf whose loyalty had stood every test, and a dragon born in the hidden depths of the north, responding to the bond of their shared blood. Even in this grim place, amid death and haunted echoes, he felt a sense of home. When the pyres were lit and the flames roared to life, the men formed a somber circle. Frostfire raised its head to watch, eyes reflecting the dancing orange and blue. Some of the men whispered half-forgotten prayers to the old gods, some simply bowed their heads. Tormund stood beside Jon, the light of the fire flickering across his fierce features. "Well, Snow," he said quietly, "the dead here are gone for good. But do we know for certain there aren't more? That cursed magic might still be out there, in the shadows." Jon closed his eyes, recalling the bitter horror of the long night. He never wanted the realm to endure such suffering again. "We can't know," he admitted. "We'll rely on our scouts, keep watch. If more appear, we'll do this again. But I pray we've cut off the worst of it." Tormund spat into the snow, the orange glow of the fires glinting off the droplets. "I will see. Either way, your dragon's proved his worth." He reached out and gently clapped a hand on Frostfire's scales. The dragon's tail flicked, but it did not hiss or show aggression. Instead, it regarded Tormund with a careful gaze, perhaps remembering the man's help in bandaging that wound. "You'll have the free folks' axes next time as well," Tormund added. "No matter what comes." When dawn's first light broke over the peaks, they ready to depart. Frostfire could fly, but only for short distances. Jon rigged together a canvas sling beneath the creature's belly so that if the dragon grew too tired, or the wound opened further, it could rest on a sled that half a dozen men would pull. It was a strange sight to be sure, a newly hatched dragon traveling alongside a mixed band of northerners and free folk, but necessity often forged odd alliances in the north. The journey back to Winterfell took several more days, the cold intensifying as clouds rolled in, threatening fresh snowfall. During that time, Frostfire's wound scabbed over, though the dragon walked or flew with a slight limp in its movements. Jon was vigilant, ensuring the makeshift bandages were changed regularly, layering them with salves to prevent infection. Each day, the young dragon tested its flame, occasionally belching a small burst into the air, as though practicing. The men gave it a wide berth, but a kind of reverent curiosity replaced their fear. It had saved their lives. They knew it. At last, the familiar walls of Winterfell loomed in the distance, half shrouded in a veil of snow. The approach to the main gate was quiet at first. Only a pair of sentries stood watch. But as the column trudged through the snowy yard, a cry went up. Servants, guards, courtiers. Everyone rushed to see the returning warriors. Some gaped at the sight of Frostfire, for few had ever glimpsed such a creature. Many had only heard whispers that Jon Snow had discovered something of great power. Now they saw living proof, tail thrashing and wings rustling. Sansa appeared at the top of the stone steps, her gaze immediately zeroing in on the dragon. Her face shifted from shock to relief to guarded composure. She descended briskly, her cloak trailing behind, flurries of snow swirling around her. Arya, close at her side, stared with undisguised admiration as Frostfire limped into the courtyard. The dragon's nostrils flared at the scent of new people, its eyes darting warily. Jon dismounted his horse, waved for the men to stand back, then gently placed a hand on Frostfire's neck, calming it. Arya's voice was soft with awe. "Gods, it's grown." She walked a careful circle around the creature, who hissed once but then recognized her scent, remembering those nights she had helped care for it. She reached out to stroke the cool, smooth scales above the bandaged flank, her expression a strange mix of wonder and pity. "You're hurt." "A scratch compared to what might have been," Jon said wryly. "We faced a large host of wights near the gorge. Frostfire fought with us, drove them back with its flame. We won, but not without cost." Sansa's eyes flicked from the dragon to Jon, relief warring with worry on her face. "At least you're safe, both of you. The entire castle's been uneasy since you left. Rumors spread faster than ravens these days." Jon nodded. "We'll talk in private. For now, let's get Frostfire to shelter. It needs warmth." He led the dragon to a portion of the castle walls near the old stables, where the heat from Winterfell's natural hot springs vented through the stones. Arya fetched some of the linens and supplies they had once used in the subchamber. A cluster of guards tried to follow, but Sansa dismissed them. The fewer onlookers, the better. They spread out straw and old furs in a corner enclosed on three sides, the stone radiating mild warmth. Frostfire settled down with a weary grunt, head resting on its front claws. Jon, Arya, and Sansa hovered there until a healer arrived, an older woman named Hylela who had worked in the infirmary since the wars. She looked at Frostfire with trembling hands, uncertain how to treat a dragon, but eventually overcame her fear. She cleaned the wound with boiled water, applied a mild poultice, and rewrapped the bandages with deft skill. Frostfire grumbled, but it did not lash out. Something in Jon's presence soothed it. Exhausted, Jon finally turned to Sansa. "We need to speak. In your solar." She nodded, and they made their way through the courtyard, stepping around the curious eyes and hushed chatter of onlookers. Arya walked behind them with Ghost, keeping any too intrusive observers at bay. Once within Sansa's private solar, they closed the door against the clamoring voices beyond. Bran was there, seated in his wheeled chair near the fire, his gaze distant as ever. When they entered, he blinked, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. "You won," Bran said quietly. "I saw it in a vision." Frostfire's flame turning the tide. Jon sighed, letting the tension ease from his shoulders now that he was among his siblings. "We did. But it's only one battle. There could be more." He looked to Sansa, who stood by the window, her arms wrapped around herself as if bracing against unseen chills. "How are things here?" She hesitated. "We've had no open threats from the south, but the news of a dragon in the north has spread, at least in rumor. Some lords have overheard snatches of conversation among the men who first saw you take Frostfire to the gorge. It's not so easy to hide something like that anymore." She paused, glancing at Bran. "We should be prepared for visitors, maybe unwanted ones." Arya folded her arms. "Let them come. We can drive them off if they try to take the dragon." Sansa frowned. "If it's a single meddling knight or two, yes. But if a faction of southern lords decided to march north to either capture or kill Frostfire, we wouldn't be able to hide. I fear we'd face something akin to war. We remember all too well what that does to the north." Jon rubbed his temple, feeling the heavy weight of leadership settle on him. It seemed that every step forward brought new complications. "We still owe loyalty to the realm. The last thing I want is to cause panic or strife. But I won't let them harm Frostfire. This dragon saved lives already. And it might save countless more if the undead re-emerge in force. The realm might need it yet again." Bran's voice was soft. "The realm will need it. My visions remain unclear, but I see glimpses, winter storms, shadows in the far north, shapes that might be old powers stirring. Not the same as the Night King, but something with the same cold hatred." A silence fell as they absorbed his words. Finally, Jon gestured to Sansa. "We need to bolster our alliances. We have friends among the northern houses, but we might need to reach out beyond. To those who supported us before, to those who saw the threat of the undead and might believe our warnings." Sansa gave a curt nod. "I can write letters at once, in your name and in mine. The Vale might listen. The Riverlands, well, that depends on who currently holds power. The Stormlands are another question. As for the Crownlands," she stopped, exhaling. "Daenerys remains queen. Officially. But since her last war, she's been focused on rebuilding King's Landing. She might respond favorably if we approach her carefully. After all, she has always claimed dominion over all dragons. But this situation is delicate." Arya snorted. "Delicate is one word for it." Jon's chest tightened at the thought of Daenerys. Their shared history was fraught: love, betrayal, heartbreak, the final stand against the Night King. How would she react to the existence of a new dragon that was not hers? Would she see it as an ally, or a threat to her own claim of power? Part of him yearned to trust her, to remember the woman he had once known, but he also remembered the devastation she had unleashed on King's Landing. She had changed in those final days, hardened by grief and vengeance. He shut his eyes for a moment, hearing the echo of old ghosts, the sound of bells tolling, the roar of dragon flames scorching the Red Keep. Then he forced himself back to the present. "We'll proceed with caution. Let's send ravens to the North's allies first, gather them here. If word spreads that Frostfire is not a threat but a guardian, perhaps we can dissuade any hasty moves from outside forces." Sansa bowed her head in agreement. Bran gazed into the fire as if lost in visions again. Arya looked at Jon with worry in her eyes. "Just be careful, Jon. Dragons attract powerful foes. We'll guard Frostfire with everything we have." He placed a hand on her shoulder, grateful. "I know. Thank you." That evening, he and Arya took shifts watching over Frostfire. The dragon slept fitfully, occasionally flinching as if haunted by the memory of battle. Jon sang quiet, half-remembered lullabies that old Nan had once crooned to him as a boy. The words were muffled nonsense now, but the gentle tones seemed to calm Frostfire. At times, the dragon opened its eyes, peering at Jon with an uncanny depth, as though it understood far more than any beast should. By the next morning, Frostfire's breathing was steadier, the edges of the wound less inflamed. It stood on its own and managed a few cautious steps, still favoring one side. Jon offered chunks of raw mutton and the dragon devoured them greedily, then lapped water from a basin Arya had placed nearby. A swirl of hope and relief coursed through Jon. If Frostfire recovered well, it could grow stronger, become a greater force against whatever evils lay beyond the horizon. Over the following days, the life of Winterfell resumed its rhythm around the new presence of a dragon in the courtyard. Sansa and her stewards tried to keep visitors away, but rumors flew among the common folk who whispered of the wonder and terror of seeing a living dragon once more. Some were intrigued, others frightened. A few foolish souls boasted they might try to slay it, but the hush of condemnation from the rest of the castle generally kept such talk from blossoming into actual attempts. Besides, Ghost rarely strayed far from Frostfire's side when Jon was absent, and even the bravest or most reckless held back at the sight of the silent white dire wolf pacing beside that silver-blue dragon. Winter storms battered the north. Snow piled high against the walls, forcing laborers to clear the gates and walkways daily. The castle's garrison drilled in the courtyard, their breath steaming in the chill air, while overhead the sky remained the color of lead. Despite the cold, the hot springs beneath Winterfell kept the interior rooms comfortable, and Frostfire often basked against the warm stones, healing steadily. By the second week, the dragon tested its wings more often, taking short flights across the courtyard when it thought no one was looking. It still bore the bandages, but the slash that the Giant's Club had caused was nearly closed. Jon doubled the patrols around Winterfell's walls and gates, partly to reassure the populace and partly to ensure no infiltrators slipped inside. If rumors of Frostfire had reached the ears of opportunists, bandits, or assassins, the castle might be tested. Meanwhile, Sansa's ravens flew to the north's principal houses, Manderley, Glover, Serwyn, Mormont, Royce in the Vale, and a handful of Riverland lords known to be sympathetic. The letters outlined the threat of undead remnants, the presence of a dragon that had fought for the living, and a plea for alliance and unity. Few replies came swiftly, for travel and communication were slower in winter. Yet one day a raven arrived bearing the seal of House Manderley. The note was short: Lord Wyman Manderley promised to come himself to see the dragon. A second reply came from Lady Alysanne Mormont. She would send a contingent of Bear Island warriors eager to see proof with their own eyes. From the Vale, there was silence at first. From the Riverlands, only a polite acknowledgement. Jon found himself pacing the corridors in idle moments, uncertain whether rallying alliances was the correct path or if it would draw too much attention. Yet the alternative, trying to hide Frostfire until it was fully grown, felt equally risky. The North could not simply bury its head in the snow. The threat of the undead was real, and if southern intrigues flared, they would need allies. On a late afternoon, about 3 weeks after the battle at the Gorge, Lord Wyman Manderley arrived at Winterfell with a small retinue. A heavy-set man with a booming laugh and a cunning glint in his eye, he greeted Jon in the Great Hall. After the courtesies, Wyman asked, "Where's this dragon, then?" "My men said they saw something from a distance flying above the battlements, but I want a closer look." Jon led him to the sheltered courtyard where Frostfire dozed in a patch of weak sunlight. Its wings were half-furled, the scales glinting faintly in shades of steel and azure. The dragon lifted its head as they approached, letting out a quiet growl that reverberated through the stones. Lord Wyman's eyes widened and a smile spread across his fleshy face. "By the seven, it's real," he breathed, taking in every detail: the lean shape, the fierce claws, the half-healed scar. "I'd heard rumors, but to see it in the flesh." Jon stepped forward, placing a hand on Frostfire's neck. The dragon relaxed a fraction. "Frostfire fought alongside us against a horde of undead," Jon said, keeping his voice calm. "Saved many lives." Lord Wyman nodded, his expression growing serious. "I recall how your brother Robb marched south with dire wolves, how they spoke of them as monstrous beasts of war. Now, we have a real dragon in the north. Is it your intention, Jon Snow, to unleash it upon your enemies?" Jon regarded him steadily. "Only if we must protect our people from undead or from those who would destroy us. I've no desire to wage another war. The north has bled enough. This dragon is a guardian. But if we are threatened, I won't hesitate." Wyman stroked his chin, jowls trembling. "You know, there are those who'd see this creature as a claim to power, a Targaryen claim, or a challenge to the current queen in King's Landing. Dragons have always been symbols of rule." "Let them think what they wish," Jon replied. "I seek no throne. Only peace and the strength to defend our home." The Lord of White Harbor eyed Frostfire's muzzle where tiny spirals of mist curled with each breath. "Peace sometimes needs more than words," he said finally. "Especially in a realm as unstable as ours. If you ever need White Harbor's support, you have it. We remember how you fought the Night King and the Great War. And now, if you say there's a new threat, he trailed off, giving a meaningful glance at the dragon's scar. Well, I'm inclined to believe you. Jon felt a rush of gratitude. Thank you, my lord. That means a great deal. They spoke of logistics, of possible future conflicts, of the loyalty the North might need to muster again. Wyman insisted on feasting with them that evening. True to his reputation, he devoured multiple platters of roast meat, but in between bites, he was shrewd and perceptive, probing Jon about the undead and how the southern lords might respond to a second great war in the north. Jon answered as best he could, mindful that even allies sometimes repeated what they heard. After the feast, as he was leaving the hall, Wyman pulled Jon aside. I know you're not the sort to proclaim yourself a king again. But consider this, many of the northern houses might accept you or even rally behind you if you decide to stand separate from Daenerys. Especially now that you have a dragon and she's not currently in the North's good graces after the destruction in the south. Jon stiffened, unsure how to respond. Years ago he had relinquished the crown for the sake of unity and to avert the cycle of bloodshed. The notion of proclaiming himself king once more felt like stepping backward into chaos. I've no desire to spark conflict, he said quietly, nor to claim a crown that would only divide us further. We must stand together, not tear the realm in two again. Wyman shrugged, a cunning light in his eyes. Just remember, if the day comes when you feel the realm is threatened by the throne, many in the north would stand with you. The dragon is a powerful symbol whether you like it or not. He bowed with a flourish and made his way to the guest quarters, leaving Jon standing in the corridor with a knot of tension in his stomach. A few days later, more visitors arrived, a small delegation from Bear Island led by Lady Alysanne Mormont herself. She was a formidable presence, broad-shouldered and blunt-spoken, a woman who had survived the wars and taken command after her legendary cousin Lyanna Mormont's death. She wasted no time upon entering the courtyard. When she saw Frostfire gnawing on a deer carcass, she strode right up to the dragon, ignoring the startled cries of her guards, and glared as if assessing an unruly soldier. Frostfire reared back, letting out a warning hiss. Its jaws dripped with blood, steam curling in the chilly air. Lady Alysanne planted her fists on her hips, eyeing the creature up and down. So, she said in a loud, commanding tone, you're the famed new monster that's taken up in Winterfell's yard. Heard you toasted some dead men up north. Jon rushed forward, wanting to calm the dragon before it lashed out. But Lady Alysanne waved him off. I've stared down worse than a half-grown dragon, Lord Snow. Still, Jon placed a hand on Frostfire's flank, murmuring soothing words. The dragon's tension ebbed, but it kept a wary eye on the Bear Island warriors. Lady Alysanne reached out and poked the dragon's bandages with a leather-gloved finger. A scar, eh? So it bleeds like any other beast. A giant clipped it with a club, Jon said. It's still healing. But yes, it bleeds. She gave a curt nod. Good. Means it's real. I was half expecting some fancy trick, the way people talk these days. She looked at Jon, her dark hair caught in the wind that whipped across the courtyard. We are the shield in the north, the Mormonts. If you say this new wave of undead is real, I believe you. But I want to see for myself in time. And if you say this dragon is on our side, I'll believe that too for now. She and her warriors stayed 3 days, evaluating the situation at Winterfell, speaking with the men who'd fought at the gorge, and of course, taking measure of Frostfire. They drilled in the yard, showing the Bear Island style of spearwork, occasionally glancing sideways at the dragon that perched atop a low wall, flicking its tail. Lady Alysanne made it clear she considered the North's independence crucial, but also that any threat from beyond the wall took priority over petty squabbles with Southerners. Before leaving, she walked with Jon through the Godwood. The air was crisp and the snow lay thick around the great weirwood, its red leaves the only color in a monochrome world. Tell me true, Snow, she said. If Daenerys Targaryen hears of this dragon, will she march north to claim it? Jon exhaled a plume of breath. I don't know what Daenerys will do. She once lost everything except her dragons, and she believed they were her children. Now, to hear another hatched beyond her reach, it could bring out her anger or her longing. Or both. He looked at the carved face in the weirwood, the sap-red eyes that seemed to watch them. I don't want war. I hope she sees Frostfire as an ally, not a rival. Lady Alysanne's gaze was thoughtful. I never met your queen. By all accounts, she was a fierce warrior and a fearsome conqueror. She also burned King's Landing and left the city in ruin. People don't forget such things. If she tries to come north to claim your dragon, Bear Island won't side with her. Jon nodded, a heaviness in his chest. Thank you, my lady. I appreciate your support. Let's hope it never comes to that. She snorted. Hope in one hand, sharpen your sword in the other. That's how we Mormonts do it. Then, turning on her heel, she strode away, leaving him alone in the silent godwood. The next week, another message arrived, this time from the south. The seal was not Daenerys's, but that of a lesser lord recently elevated who claimed to speak in the queen's name. Jon read it in Sansa's solar eyebrows knitting. The letter's tone was polite but laced with veiled threats. It acknowledged rumors of a dragon in the north, reminded Jon of his oath of fealty, and requested an immediate audience with the crown's envoy, presumably to clarify the matter. The letter concluded by implying that, should the rumors be false, a denial would suffice, but should they be true, the queen might expect to lay claim to any living dragon in the realm. Arya read it over his shoulder, scowling. They want to take Frostfire. Sansa tapped her foot on the stone floor. Yes, or at least subjugate it under Daenerys's rule. Jon set the parchment aside, frustration mingling with dread. I swore fealty once to protect the realm. But we can't hand over Frostfire. That would put the North in a vulnerable position, and who knows how Daenerys might use the dragon, or how it might react to her. This is no ordinary dragon. It's grown up here with me. Bran stirred in his chair by the hearth. Things are moving faster than we'd hoped. The realm's attention will fall on Winterfell soon. You must prepare. Jon looked from one sibling to the other, a swirl of conflicting loyalties burning in him. He remembered Daenerys's dream of breaking the wheel, freeing the oppressed. But he also recalled how everything had unraveled in fire and blood. Had she changed in the years since, or hardened further? He could not be sure. We'll respond politely, but we'll be non-committal, he decided. We'll insist that any representative who comes north does so as a guest, not as a claimant to anything. Meanwhile, we'll strengthen our defenses. Sansa exhaled, pressing a hand to her temple. So be it. I'll compose a letter with the right diplomatic flourishes. She penned a cautious reply, inviting the queen's envoy to Winterfell but making no mention of surrendering the dragon or even confirming its existence. It was a game of words, one Jon detested, but which he knew was necessary. As the days continued, Winterfell bustled with more arrivals. A small group of mountain clansmen came, ragged but loyal to the Starks. Then a handful of lesser northern lords trickled in, drawn by the rumors of a gathering, by the chance to see with their own eyes the new power that dwelt within Winterfell's walls. One bright morning, Jon led a brief demonstration in the courtyard. He asked Frostfire to fly a short loop around the towers and then breathe a small jet of flame over a target dummy. The dragon obliged, though it still favored its injured flank. The onlookers gasped, some stepping back in fear, others clapping or shouting praise. Jon watched them carefully, reading their reactions. Most looked awed, a few unnerved. A couple had the unmistakable gleam of ambition in their eyes. Later, as Jon was tending Frostfire alone, a quiet voice spoke behind him. You're good with it. He turned and saw Arya leaning against the wall, arms folded. She approached softly, her breath fogging in the cold. Frostfire, chewing on a slab of meat, glanced her way but made no threatening sound. It knows you, Jon said, offering a small smile. It trusts you too. She reached out, and the dragon let her stroke beneath its jaw. Such a strange creature. I can't help feeling that it's aware of everything we say. Almost like it understands. Do you think it does? Jon shrugged. Not in words. But it's smarter than any animal I've ever known. There's something in its eyes. I feel a connection. Like it knows my thoughts, my fears. Arya looked up at him, the winter light catching the silver in her eyes. Sometimes I think the same about Ghost. These direwolves are more than just beasts. Maybe it's the same with dragons, especially one that hatched in Winterfell. It might be bound to the old gods too in some way. Jon considered that. The hot springs beneath the castle, the ancient crypts, the old ways that lingered in the north, maybe something deeper had seeped into Frostfire's shell while it lay hidden. The union of ice and fire, as Bran had said. He felt a stirring of curiosity and dread, thinking of the powerful magics in the world that even the wisest maesters struggled to comprehend. A commotion in the courtyard drew their attention. They saw a pair of gate guards rushing in, calling out that riders approached from the south, bearing the royal banner. Jon and Arya exchanged a tense look. The queen's envoy had arrived. They hastened to the main gate where Sansa already stood, flanked by northern guards. Through the swirling snow, a small party emerged, half a dozen mounted knights wearing armor with the royal sigil of House Targaryen, the three-headed dragon. But it was not Daenerys's old silver-haired retinue. These were newcomers, men who had come into power after the war. Leading them was a man in his 40s with a narrow face and keen gray eyes. He wore a thick cloak trimmed with red, and as he halted his horse, he glanced up at the walls of Winterfell with a calculating air. "I am Lord Andros Ricker, envoy of Her Grace Queen Daenerys Targaryen," he announced. His voice carried, practiced in the manner of courtiers. "I come at Her Grace's request to speak with the Warden of the North." Sansa offered him a frosty courtesy. "Welcome to Winterfell. I am Lady Sansa Stark. The Warden of the North, Lord Jon Snow, stands beside me." She gestured to Jon. Lord Ricker's gaze flicked briefly to Jon, then to Arya, and back again. There was an undercurrent of arrogance in his posture, though he kept his tone civil. "My thanks for your welcome, Lady Stark. The Queen has heard troubling rumors, whispers of a new dragon. She wishes to know if these rumors are true and if so, how such a creature came to be in the north." "We can discuss that inside," Jon said quietly. "You and your men must be cold. Our halls are warmer." Lord Ricker dismounted. "Very well." They led the envoy and his knights into the great hall, offering them mulled wine and seating them near the hearth. All the while, Jon felt a tension simmering in the air, as though a single misstep might spark open conflict. The men wore swords at their hips, and they seemed to eye the northern guards with a mixture of disdain and caution. Once seated, Lord Ricker wasted no time. "We've heard accounts from travelers, merchants, even whispers from the Night's Watch that a dragon has been spotted flying over Winterfell. That it was used in battle against undead in the far north. Are these reports false?" Jon met his stare evenly. "They are true. There is a dragon here named Frostfire. It was hatched from an egg discovered in Winterfell's crypts." A flicker of shock crossed Ricker's face, quickly masked. "You openly admit this?" "I see no reason to lie." Sansa's voice was crisp. "This dragon has already defended the living against remnants of the undead threat. It remains here under Jon's protection." Ricker sipped his wine, clearly trying to measure how to proceed. "Her Grace will be most interested to learn of this. As the last remaining Targaryen dragon rider, she has a special concern for the well-being and fate of any living dragons." Arya leaned forward slightly, gaze sharp. "You mean she wants to claim it?" Ricker set his cup down, offering a thin smile. "It is well known that dragons belong to House Targaryen by blood and by right. However, the Queen is not without generosity. She might extend her patronage, her protection, should you be willing to bring the dragons south. We could form a new alliance, reaffirm your fealty, and ensure the dragons care under experienced handlers in King's Landing." Jon felt a surge of anger coil in his gut, but he kept his voice steady. "Frostfire is not a commodity to be handed over. It's a living creature that hatched under unique circumstances. You can tell the Queen that we respect her position. But this dragon has bonded to me. If she truly cares about the well-being of dragons, she should recognize that separating it from its bonded rider would do more harm than good." Ricker studied him, a flicker of derision in his eyes. "You call yourself its bonded rider, yet you do not sit on its back. Have you flown it?" Jon pressed his lips into a thin line. "It's young. Injured recently in battle. It isn't yet strong enough for a rider. But the bond exists nonetheless." A faint sneer curled Ricker's lip. "Our Queen believes that a true dragon rider is chosen by the dragon, not by mere happenstance. She would prefer to see that bond tested in her presence, in the tradition of House Targaryen." Before Jon could retort, Sansa intervened, her voice ice-cold. "We do not doubt the Queen's knowledge of dragons, but the North is not in the habit of delivering our defenders into captivity. Frostfire has already shed blood protecting the realm from the undead. We will not send it away simply because the South demands it." Ricker's knights shifted uncomfortably. One or two of them glanced around at the heavily armed northern guards. The tension in the hall thickened. Lord Ricker forced another tight-lipped smile. "This is not a demand. I am here to negotiate, to open channels. If you are unwilling to part with the dragon, perhaps you would be willing to bring it south yourself, where the Queen can witness it and decide on the next steps." A show of trust, of good faith. A muscle in Jon's jaw tightened. Traveling south with Frostfire was the last thing he wanted, especially with winter setting in. Even if the weather were mild, marching a dragon into King's Landing would be akin to throwing it into the lion's den. He pictured Daenerys in the ruined capital, uncertain how she might react. Would she see him as an ally, or would old resentments flare? Would she attempt to bind Frostfire to her own will, claiming that only a Targaryen queen was worthy of controlling dragons? He responded carefully, "The North is in the midst of rebuilding after the wars, dealing with scattered undead. Now isn't the time for me to travel south. If the queen wishes to send an invitation, I'll consider it when the realm is more stable. Ricker inclined his head, the courtesy forced. I will carry your words to her grace. She may decide to come north again herself if that is more convenient. His tone made it clear that such a visit might not be purely cordial. Jon felt Arya bristling beside him. He laid a hand on the table, silently urging calm. We welcome peaceful visitors. We do not welcome threats. Lord Ricker rose, his knights following suit. No threats, Lord Snow. Only a gentle reminder, dragons have always shaped the fate of Westeros. Let us pray your newfound companion does not lead to complications. He offered a shallow bow. I shall depart on the morrow if I may enjoy your hospitality tonight. Sansa's chin lifted. You have it, my lord. When the envoy left the hall, the tension lingered like a sour taste. Jon looked to Sansa and Arya. This is exactly what we feared. A demand veiled as negotiation. They want Frostfire in King's Landing. Arya's voice was a low hiss. Better to die than let them take him. Sansa rubbed the back of her neck. We need to be careful. If the queen decides to come north in force, we can't fight a war alone, especially if Frostfire isn't fully grown. Bran, who had been quietly observing from a far corner, spoke in his measured tones. The future is in flux, but I see a storm on the horizon. If Daenerys comes north with her armies or her own dragons, conflict may be inevitable unless she can be convinced that Frostfire poses no threat to her rule. That might require understanding. And that is in short supply. Jon recalled the last time Daenerys had come north, the uneasy alliances, the suspicion. Now, with years past and a new dragon in his care, the tension could be even greater. Yet something in him refused to relinquish hope that Daenerys might be reasoned with. There had been a time when they stood together against the Night King, bound by a cause and by something more personal. Could he remind her of that? Could she still be the woman he had once trusted, or had too many scars formed since the war? That night, Jon could not sleep. He paced the ramparts where snow drifted quietly under the moonlight. Ghost followed him, silent as a shadow. Below, he glimpsed Frostfire curled against the warm courtyard wall, a faint shimmer of breath rising in the cold. The creature looked peaceful, but Jon knew it was a fleeting calm. Storms brewed in every corner of Westeros. The undead in the far north, the suspicious lords in the south, Daenerys' tenuous rule, so many pieces poised on the edge of the board. He found his feet carrying him to the godwood where he discovered Bran sitting in quiet reverie beneath the weirwood tree. The carved face on the trunk seemed to regard them both with a timeless, blood-tinged stare. Jon stood by Bran's chair, drawing his cloak tight against the chill. Sometimes I wish we could just stop all this, he murmured. But that's not how the world works. Bran's eyes flickered. You were in the midst of a story woven long before you were born, Jon. You can't simply step off the page. Jon's throat tightened. He knelt by Bran. Tell me what you see. Please. Anything that can guide us. Bran's gaze turned distant as if looking into an unseen realm. I see glimpses of ice beyond the wall, stirring in places deep and secret. The dead do not rest easily there. I see shapes of men in armor, red and black banners, marching across the snow toward Winterfell. I see a woman with silver hair standing amid broken towers. A dragon's shadow crosses her face. I hear roars, screams, but also words of regret, pleas for forgiveness. His voice softened. I see no certain end. A chill that had nothing to do with the wind crawled over Jon's skin. So, war is coming? Possibly, Bran said. But not everything in a vision is set in stone. Choices matter. How you speak, how you stand, whom you trust. There is still a chance for peace, though it may come at great cost. Jon bowed his head, absorbing these cryptic portents. It had always been so with Bran. He saw fragments of the future, but only a swirl of possibilities, never a certain path. Thank you, Jon whispered. Then he rose, pressing a hand briefly to Bran's shoulder. Try to rest. We'll need your counsel again soon. In the morning, Lord Ricker departed, leaving behind a hush of uncertainty. Jon watched from the battlements as the southern knights rode out. Snowdrift. In thick flurries, gradually obscuring them from view. Sansa joined him, face pensive. Well, she said quietly, the game is afoot. Ricker will return to King's Landing, and we can only guess how Daenerys will respond. We should be prepared for anything. Jon nodded, mind racing. We'll gather more allies. Fortify our supplies in case of a siege. Train the soldiers as well as Frostfire. There isn't much more we can do until we receive her reply or until she comes herself. Over the following weeks, Winterfell braced itself. The yard rang with the clash of steel as men drilled relentlessly. Engineers reinforced the walls, built new defenses. Word spread among the northern lords that a reckoning might be coming, that the south might challenge their autonomy or even threaten Frostfire. Some openly rallied to Jon's side, while others wavered, uncertain whether to pin their loyalties on a single dragon that might or might not stand against the might of Queen Daenerys. Through it all, Frostfire grew stronger. The wound from the Giant's Club healed at last, leaving only a pale scar under the scales. Each day, Jon took the dragon out to the open field just beyond the walls, instructing it to fly in wide arcs. Gradually, Frostfire's endurance improved and Jon dared to let the dragon lift him a short distance into the sky. It was not a true flight. Frostfire was still too small to bear his full weight confidently, but it was a step forward. In these sessions, Jon's heart pounded with awe. The rush of wind, the sense of a living beast beneath him, the keen intelligence in Frostfire's eyes, it was unlike anything he had ever known. Once, the dragon soared a dozen yards above the snowy ground, and for a brief moment, Jon felt that perfect unity Daenerys had described when riding her own dragons, a melding of awareness, man and creature moving as one. They landed quickly, stumbling in the snow, but the taste of flight lingered in Jon's veins. Frostfire roared softly, turning its head to Jon, and he laughed with breathless exhilaration, patting the dragon's neck. "Soon," he murmured. "Soon you'll be strong enough for true flight." But every high moment carried the weight of impending conflict. In the nights, a restlessness plagued Jon. He drifted in and out of fitful dreams, Daenerys's face flickering in flame, the Red Keep collapsing under dragon fire, the silent armies of the dead marching across white fields. Often he awoke in a cold sweat, unsure whether he had truly escaped the dream. The winter wind moaned through the tower windows, and he feared that all the realm's tragedies were poised to repeat. A month passed, and in that time no direct word arrived from King's Landing. The tension grew. The North prepared. Lord Wyman Manderley even left some of his men stationed at Winterfell, saying they would help maintain order if the Queen's forces appeared. From the hills, the clan chiefs sent scouts to watch the roads. Tormund, from the far north, sent a raven. The undead activity had quieted again, for now, but something felt eerie, as if a malevolent power was testing the edges of the living world. Then one morning, a sentry rushed to find Jon in the courtyard. The guard was breathless, cheeks reddened with cold. "Riders, my lord. From the south. More than a scouting party, this looks like an army. Banners of the dragon." Jon's heart lurched. So Daenerys had come, or at least a large force under her command. "Are they close? Half a day's ride, perhaps? Our scouts say they move slowly through the snow, but they're heading straight for Winterfell." News spread through the castle like wildfire. Sansa convened a war council in the Great Hall. Lords Manderley, Glover, Serwyn, Lady Alysanne Mormont, and a few others gathered. The consensus was that they must prepare for either a siege or negotiations. Some wanted to man the walls at once, refusing entrance. Others argued that denying entry would confirm hostility. Arya muttered that a siege in deep winter could be disastrous for both sides. Jon listened, arms folded, trying to quell the roiling fear and anticipation in his chest. Finally, he said, "We'll treat them as potential guests under the old laws of hospitality. But we remain ready for conflict if they force it. Daenerys fought alongside us once. Let's see if we can speak before blood is shed." The lords accepted his decision with varying degrees of reluctance. They began to organize the men, archers on the walls, cavalry in reserve, hidden watchers in the towers. Meanwhile, Jon went to Frostfire's makeshift roost. The dragon sensed the shift in the castle's energy, pacing restlessly, wings half extended. Ghost prowled near, hackles raised. Jon placed a calming hand on Frostfire's side. "We'll face this together. Stay by my side, but do not attack unless I command it." Frostfire let out a low rumble. It was bigger now, tall enough that Jon could stand beside it and only just see over its shoulder. The silver-blue scales rippled with tension. By midday, the southern army appeared on the horizon, a dark line moving across the white plains. Jon stood atop the battlements, Sansa at his side, and watched the procession. At the forefront, crimson and black banners snapped in the wind. Ricker's face was nowhere to be seen from this distance, but Jon guessed he might be among them, guiding the Queen's forces. At the heart of the column, a figure on horseback rode under the grand standard of House Targaryen. The gates of Winterfell remained closed, but at Jon's order, the outer yard was cleared and men lined the parapets. When the southern force halted within earshot, a herald rode forward and called out, announcing the arrival of Daenerys Targaryen, first of her name, Queen of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the first men, Khaleesi of the Great Grass Sea, Breaker of Chains, and Mother of Dragons. At that, Jon's stomach twisted. Memories flooded him. Her face, her fierce determination, her heartbreak, the final look in her eyes when he had confronted her so long ago. That had been at Dragonstone after King's Landing burned, after countless lives had been lost in a storm of fire and madness. They had parted with bitterness thick between them, neither able to reconcile. Now she was here, at his gates, and they had a new dragon caught between them. He summoned his courage and called back, "Daenerys Targaryen is welcome to parley within these walls if she comes in peace." There was a pause. Then the herald declared, "Her grace will enter. She expects safe conduct for herself and her honor guard." Jon nodded to Sansa, who signaled for the gates to open. The heavy doors groaned, and a hush fell over the northern ranks. Daenerys rode in, flanked by 24 knights, all in black and red livery. She wore a heavy cloak of black fur over a silver gown that clung to her slim form, a single braid in her platinum hair. Her face was set in a composed mask, but her violet eyes burned with intensity. Jon descended the stairs to the courtyard, the crowd parting around him. Sansa followed a step behind, face impassive. Arya stood to one side, hand on her sword, while the assembled northern lords watched from a careful distance. Frostfire crouched near the warm stones, chest heaving with agitation. Ghost prowled at Jon's heel. Daenerys halted her horse and dismounted with practiced grace. She looked around, taking in the changes in Winterfell, the repaired walls, the watchful archers, the hush of anticipation. When her gaze found Jon, she did not smile or frown. Her expression was unreadable. "Jon Snow," she said, her voice clear as a bell in the cold air. "It has been some time." He inclined his head. "Your Grace, I see you've come with a sizable escort." She glanced over her shoulder at the ranks behind her. "One cannot be too careful with rumors of a rogue dragon and an army of undead. My scouts confirm the undead threat is real but scattered. The rumors of a dragon are also evidently true." Her eyes flickered toward Frostfire, which let out a warning hiss, bearing rows of sharp teeth. Jon raised his hand slightly, as if to show calm. "This is Frostfire, hatched beneath Winterfell from an ancient egg. It fought against the undead in the gorge, saving many lives." Daenerys's gaze lingered on the dragon for a long moment. Something flickered across her face, wonder, envy, sorrow. "I thought my own dragons were the last in the world," she said softly. "Yet here stands another, born of ice and fire in the north. How extraordinary." Jon drew in a shaky breath, feeling the tension coil tighter. "The north is grateful for its help in defending against the undead. Now we must decide how we face the threats to come." Daenerys's voice cooled. "Yes. But first we must discuss the matter of loyalty. The North pledged fealty to me, yet you keep a dragon as if it's yours alone. Do you see why that concerns me?" Jon bit down on his initial defensive reply. He needed to tread carefully. All around them, soldiers fingered their weapons. The slightest provocation could spark violence. "I've never sought to deny your authority as queen, nor do I challenge your claim to the throne," he said, choosing his words slowly. "But this dragon has bonded with me. Separating us would only harm its growth, its loyalty, and potentially the realm's safety. I'm prepared to work with you if we can find common ground." Her mouth tightened. He saw old bitterness lurking in her eyes, the memory of King's Landing's downfall, the rift that had opened between them. "And what does that cooperation look like?" Before he could answer, Frostfire let out a sharp screech, flaring its wings. Daenerys's knights stiffened, some drawing swords halfway from scabbards. Jon stepped protectively in front of the dragon. "Steady," he murmured, urging Frostfire to stand down. Daenerys lifted a hand, motioning her men to hold. "It's a temperamental thing. It senses the tension," Jon said. "No one here wants bloodshed." He glanced at Sansa, who nodded in silent support. Then he forced himself to meet Daenerys's gaze once more. "Will you come inside? We can speak privately. The great hall is warmer." She hesitated, and for a moment he wondered if she would refuse. Then she gave a curt nod. "Very well. But my honor guard remains nearby." "Agreed. Frostfire will remain here, guarded by my people." Her lips curved in a humorless smile. "Your people." "Very well, Jon Snow." They moved inside, the northern lords making space with visible reluctance. Daenerys walked ahead, regal and aloof, her knights close behind. Jon followed, his thoughts a turbulent sea of old regrets, new hopes, and the precarious future that hung by a thread. Frostfire's hiss echoed through the courtyard as its master disappeared into the keep with the woman who had once been called the Mother of Dragons. In the great hall, they arranged a guarded circle. Daenerys sat in a high-backed chair near the dais, her knights fanned out behind her. Jon, Sansa, Arya, and a few northern lords stood opposite. The hall was lit by torches that flickered on the ancient stone walls, and a crackling hearth near the front provided some warmth. The tension was palpable. Daenerys folded her hands in her lap. Tell me, Jon. What do you truly intend to do with this dragon? He exchanged a glance with Sansa, who gave him a nearly imperceptible nod, encouraging honesty. Jon drew a breath. Defend the living against any threat. We still have pockets of undead beyond the wall, a potential new menace in the Frostfangs. If war returns to Westeros from any direction, Frostfire can help preserve peace. The North is not looking to conquer the South. Her voice hardened. Yet some would see your possession of a dragon as a direct challenge to my reign. Only those who hunger for conflict, he replied carefully. I remember how you once said your dragons were not simply weapons, but children and a symbol of freedom. Let Frostfire be that, a symbol of cooperation between the North and the Crown, not a cause for division. She studied him, her violet eyes unblinking. Her tone softened, a whisper of old pain. I lost Rhaegal and Viserion in the war. Drogon remains, but he is aging and we've had our differences. To see a new dragon, so young, so strong, part of me is overjoyed. Another part is furious that you kept it hidden from me. Sansa spoke up, her voice level. Hidden, yes, because we feared how you might react. The North cannot afford to lose such a valuable ally. That fear is not baseless, your grace. A flicker of anger crossed Daenerys's face, quickly replaced by a weary resignation. Perhaps not. I have made mistakes. I won't deny that. Her hand curled over the arm of the chair. Still, I am queen, and I cannot allow a second dragon rider in the realm without ensuring loyalty. If I agree to let the dragon remain with you, how can I be sure you will not someday claim a crown? Jon felt every eye on him. He met Daenerys's gaze steadily. I swear on my honor, on the memory of my father, Ned Stark, that I will not seek the throne. The North only wants to keep our people safe. A heavy silence followed. Daenerys regarded him, emotions warring behind her eyes, pride, hurt, longing, mistrust. Then her gaze flicked to Arya, Sansa, and the other northern lords who stood firm behind Jon. Finally, she said, words are air. But your actions in the last war proved you do care for the realm. I will consider your oath sincere for now. Her knights shifted as if expecting an argument. But Daenerys continued, in return I will recognize your guardianship of Frostfire so long as you acknowledge my sovereignty. If I call upon you for aid against threats to the realm, including any undead, you will come. And if the day comes when I request to see Frostfire at King's Landing, you will not refuse me outright. Jon glanced at Sansa. She seemed uneasy, but she gave a reluctant nod. Arya's expression was guarded. We'll answer a call if it's in defense of the living, Jon said. But I won't bring Frostfire south just for spectacle. Daenerys inclined her head. Understood. Then let this be an accord, however uneasy. Her voice turned brittle. I did not march an army north to fight you, Jon Snow. I came to ensure no new threat would rise to challenge me. But if you keep your word, you have nothing to fear from me. Jon bowed slightly. Thank you, your grace. She stood abruptly. I will remain in Winterfell a short time to see Frostfire myself, learn more of this undead threat in the far north. Then I'll return south. If any sign of treachery emerges, do not doubt that I'll return in force. But perhaps we can still find a way to stand together as we once did. The words held a faint echo of old alliance, old friendship. Jon felt a surge of conflicting emotions, relief, grief for what had been lost, and a cautious hope for what might still be salvaged. He looked around at the watchful faces of the northern lords. You have our hospitality, he said. When the gathering dispersed, Daenerys retreated with a handful of her knights to the guest quarters. Jon took a moment to lean against the wall, breathing unsteadily, his mind churning. Sansa approached, touching his arm. She's not the same woman you knew, Sansa murmured. I saw it in her eyes, too much has happened. But this is better than open war. Jon nodded. Yes. Though I fear this truce is as fragile as thin ice on a frozen lake. They parted ways. Jon sought out Arya, who was pacing the courtyard near Frostfire, her expression knotted with concern. We have to watch her knights, Arya said in a low voice. They're prowling around already, eyeing the walls. One of them even came too close to Frostfire. The dragon nearly snapped his head off. Jon grimaced. We'll keep them in sight. No doubt she's doing the same with our men. He moved to Frostfire's side, placing a hand on its flank. The dragon rumbled as though complaining about the strange presence in the castle. Easy, Jon whispered. She's staying for a while. We have to get along. Frostfire snorted a plume of frosty breath that dissipated in the air. Jon found himself silently pleading that everything would hold together, that Daenerys would not overreach, that the northern lords would not provoke her, that no new calamity would push them all into war. At sunset, Daenerys appeared in the courtyard, flanked by 2 knights. She wore a thick cloak, her breath curling in the frigid air. She asked Jon to show her Frostfire up close. Jon obliged, though he kept a reassuring hand on the dragon's neck. Daenerys approached with a strange expression, both longing and apprehension. Frostfire hissed softly, lifting its head. Jon whispered soothing words, stroking its scales. Daenerys halted a pace away from the dragon, eyes tracing the lines of its body. It's smaller than Drogon was at this age, but it looks healthy. The coloring is remarkable. She held out a hand slowly, letting the dragon sniff. Frostfire flicked its tongue, tasting the air. It did not snap or shy away, though the tension in its posture remained. Timidly, Daenerys laid her palm on its scales. Frostfire shivered at her touch, releasing a crackling breath. Jon watched carefully, ready to intervene if the dragon grew hostile. But Frostfire tolerated her hand for a moment, then turned its head aside as if rejecting a deeper connection. A haunted look crossed Daenerys's face. I can almost feel the heat beneath its skin, like a furnace, she murmured. My dragons once let me touch them freely. Now, Drogon is all but estranged from me, perhaps sensing my guilt over King's Landing. And here you have a new friend in the north. She withdrew her hand, her voice catching on an undertone of envy. I once believed dragons were my birthright alone. But this one wants you. Jon felt a pang of sympathy for her, recalling the bond she had shared with her own dragons. Frostfire is different. Part of it is the environment, part something else. It's not just Targaryen blood in me that calls to it. It's Stark blood, or the old gods, or both. She pulled her cloak around herself, stepping back. You speak as if you've learned the secrets of dragons. He shook his head. No. I'm learning as I go. I wish things could have been different. Her violet eyes flicked to him, then away. Yes, she whispered. So do I. She turned and walked back toward the keep, her knights trailing behind. Jon watched her go, uncertain if this moment of vulnerability had opened a door between them or if it was simply a painful reminder that they stood on opposite shores, separated by an ocean of past sins. That evening, Daenerys dined with a handful of northern lords, Sansa and Jon in the Great Hall. The conversation was stiff but polite. She asked about the undead threat, Tormund's reports, the conditions of the north. Sansa answered with measured caution, emphasizing the precarious nature of winter, how resources were stretched thin. Daenerys spoke vaguely about rebuilding King's Landing, the struggles to hold the realm together, rebellious lords in the Reach. Afterward, Jon took a walk along the ramparts. He found Daenerys standing on a parapet near the East Tower, gazing over the moonlit snow cape. She must have slipped away from her knights. She turned at his footsteps, a distant sadness in her eyes. You shouldn't be alone, Jon said gently. Some of our people still fear or resent you. Her lips curved in a bitter smile. Let them. I remember when I first came north, things were simpler then. We had a common enemy. Now that the Night King is gone, it's only politics and power again. And I am not the same. She lowered her A's. Nor are you. Jon nodded, stepping closer, the cold wind biting at his cheeks. We've both changed. The war forced us to do things we regret. She raised her head, eyes glimmering in the moonlight. Do you regret it all, Jon? Do you regret meeting me? He hesitated, torn by old feelings. In another life, they had come together with fierce intensity. But so much had happened, her burning of King's Landing, his sense of betrayal, their final parting. No, he said at last. I regret the choices we made, the pain we caused, but not that we tried to save the realm together. You helped us defeat the Night King. Many lives were spared. She closed her eyes briefly, as if bracing against the memory of the fire she unleashed in the capital. Some nights, I dream of my dragons scorching King's Landing. I see the ashes, I see the burned bodies. I don't know if I can ever atone for that. A pang of compassion struck him. For all her hardness, she was still haunted by what she had done. We can't change the past, he said softly. But we can try to do better. That's all anyone can do. She nodded slowly, tears shining in her eyes but not falling. Is that what you're doing with this new dragon, Jon? Trying to do better. He glanced at the courtyard where Frostfire slept, its silhouette barely visible in the moonlight. Trying, he repeated. Hoping we don't repeat the same mistakes. They stood in silence for a moment, the crisp air carrying the faint scent of pine and snow. Then she pulled her cloak tighter and turned away. I will speak with you again soon. We'll see if this truce can hold. Jon watched her descend the steps, her form disappearing into the darkness of the castle. Despite all the bitterness, a small spark of understanding lingered between them. Whether it would be enough to prevent a larger conflict, he could not say. In the days that followed, Daenerys and her host remained at Winterfell, forging an uneasy coexistence with the northern populace. She inspected the defenses, asked questions about the undead, met with some of the lords. Each day, Jon sensed a subdued tension as if waiting for a single spark that might ignite hostility. Yet no spark came. Daenerys did not demand Frostfire's immediate surrender, nor did she attempt to assert direct control over Winterfell. Instead, she observed. One morning, word came that an undead raiding party had attacked a small northern settlement near the edge of the haunted forest, killing the inhabitants and raising some as whites. The news spread alarm through the castle. Jon immediately began assembling a force to ride north and eliminate the threat before it could grow. To his surprise, Daenerys offered to send a contingent of her knights to assist. If these undead threaten the realm, they threaten me as well, she said stiffly. We will fight them together. Jon accepted. He led a combined group of northern soldiers and Targaryen knights, with Tormund guiding from the front. Frostfire flew overhead for short intervals, though it still couldn't carry Jon for an extended flight. The fresh snow made travel slow and grueling, but eventually they reached the settlement. Little more than a scattering of huts and farmland. The sight was grim. Half-eaten corpses lay in the snow, footprints leading into a nearby copse of trees. They tracked the undead into the forest, fanning out carefully among the frost-laden pines. The whites attacked at dusk, rushing out from behind trunks and drifts, their gaunt faces twisted in eternal hunger. Jon's forces clashed in a frenzy of steel and shrieks. Frostfire blasted through the canopy with a burst of bluish flame, incinerating several whites in a single gout of fire. Targaryen knights fought shoulder to shoulder with northern spearmen, the combined might pushing back the undead. Within an hour, they had destroyed them all, burning the remains so they couldn't rise again. In the aftermath, the living gathered in the clearing, breathing heavily in the cold, sooty air. A Targaryen knight lay wounded, but Tormund knelt beside him with a grim sort of care. Jon placed a hand on the knight's shoulder. You fought bravely, he said, and the knight, young and pale-faced, nodded, letting out a ragged breath. We had no idea the dead were so relentless, the knight whispered. My thanks. Nearby, Tormund spat into the snow. Relentless is the word, he muttered, wiping his axe clean. You southern boys did all right, though. Better than I expected. Jon scanned the clearing, ensuring no stragglers survived. Frostfire circled overhead, letting out a piercing cry that echoed through the trees. For a moment, he felt a surge of unity, seeing Targaryen banners alongside northern ones. Men from both sides working to eradicate the undead threat. If only that unity could hold once they returned home. They stayed the night in the settlement's remains, making camp under the starlight. The Targaryen knights lit fires and shared rations with the Northmen, forging a fragile camaraderie in the face of a common enemy. Frostfire perched on a half-collapsed barn, occasionally flapping its wings and casting watchful glances at the dark forest. Jon sat by the largest fire, where Tormund regaled a pair of knights with exaggerated tales of the free folk's exploits. The tension between them had eased, at least momentarily. When Jon rose to check on the perimeter, he found a knight standing alone, gazing toward the distant silhouette of Frostfire. Lord Snow, the knight said when Jon approached. I see now why you say this dragon fights for all of us. It saved my life today. Jon nodded, recalling how Frostfire's flame had broken a surge of whites that threatened to overwhelm the knights. It will defend anyone who stands with the living. The knight removed his helm, revealing a lined face with earnest eyes. Then perhaps there is no need for discord between her grace and the north. If we can unite around this dragon, if you and the queen, he trailed off, unsure how to continue. Jon managed a wan smile. If only it were that simple. Years of mistrust and bitterness don't vanish overnight. But I hope you're right that we might find a path forward. The knight inclined his head. I'll speak well of this fight when we return, that's a promise. Jon clapped him on the shoulder, moved by his sincerity. As he turned to go, he glanced back at Frostfire's silhouette, lit by moonlight. Even from a distance, he could sense the dragon's slow, powerful breaths. It was a force that could unite or destroy, depending on how it was wielded. He prayed that fate would guide them to unity. When they returned to Winterfell, Daenerys listened to the knights' accounts of the battle. A flicker of approval touched her expression, though she guarded her emotions carefully. She acknowledged that Frostfire had proven instrumental. The mood in the castle lifted, if only slightly. Some of Daenerys's men began mingling more openly with the Northerners, sharing stories of the fight. A sense of tentative partnership emerged. Still, Daenerys did not declare a lasting peace. She remained watchful, discussing matters of governance with Sansa, occasionally exchanging terse words with northern lords who resented any southern intrusion. Tensions flared one night when a pair of drunken Targaryen soldiers scuffled with a band of northern spearmen, resulting in bruises and ugly epithets. Jon intervened, scolding them like quarrelsome children. Day by day, winter tightened its grip, howling winds piling drifts against the walls. Daenerys began to speak of returning south soon, lest her army be trapped by heavy snow. She summoned Jon and Sansa to the Great Hall one afternoon, declaring that she would depart within a fortnight. "I can't risk my forces being stranded in the north if the snows grow worse," she said. "I trust you'll remember our agreement. If I call upon you to aid the realm, you will come." Jon bowed his head. "We will if it's against the undead or any threat to the living. Frostfire remains here as a guardian." Daenerys' gaze flicked to Sansa, who inclined her head in polite acknowledgement. Then Daenerys looked back at Jon. "One last request before I go," she said. "Fly with me." He frowned in confusion. "Fly how?" A faint, sad smile touched her lips. "I brought Drogon. He remains camped outside Winterfell, beyond the hills. He's older now, more temperamental, but I can still ride him. I want to see if your dragon will join us in flight, even briefly. Let the realm's watchers see that our dragons do not war with each other. That you and I are not enemies." Jon felt a jolt of surprise. He had not realized Drogon was so close. The older dragon must have been kept beyond sight, perhaps in a valley where it could hunt. He exchanged a glance with Sansa. She looked wary but said nothing. Slowly he nodded. "If Frostfire is willing. He's flown only short distances, but perhaps enough to show unity." Daenerys inclined her head. "Tomorrow then. Meet me at dawn by the eastern ridge." When she left, Sansa caught Jon's arm. "Are you sure about this? The last time you rode with her dragons, it ended poorly." He forced a wry smile. "We can't live in the past forever. If we're truly trying for peace, this might be a sign. And if something goes wrong, well, we'll be prepared." That night, Jon checked Frostfire's harness, ensuring the dragon was healthy enough for a short flight. Frostfire nuzzled him, letting out a quiet croon. Jon hoped the young dragon would not be spooked by Drogon, who was so much larger and more experienced. Dawn broke cold and clear, the sun peeking over a horizon rimmed with ice. Jon led Frostfire out of Winterfell, accompanied by a small guard, including Arya and Tormund. In a broad meadow just north of the ridge, they found Daenerys waiting with Drogon. The sight took Jon's breath away. Drogon was vast, easily 4 times Frostfire's size, his scales black as midnight, scarred from countless battles. He let out a deep rumble when Frostfire approached, smoke curling from his nostrils. Frostfire hissed, unsettled by the presence of the older dragon. Jon stroked the smaller dragon's neck, speaking reassuring words. Daenerys stood at Drogon's flank, hand on the massive scales. "Easy," she murmured, glancing at Jon. "They'll be wary of each other at first. Let's see if they can tolerate a brief flight side by side." Jon nodded, fastening the final buckles of Frostfire's harness. He mounted carefully, feeling the dragon shift beneath him. Frostfire's wings flared, and it let out a sharp cry, as if challenging Drogon. The older dragon answered with a thunderous roar, rattling the ice-crusted branches at the meadow's edge. Daenerys climbed onto Drogon's back with practiced agility, taking hold of the ridges behind his neck. "Fly," she commanded. Drogon spread his massive wings and launched into the air, churning snow in a whirlwind beneath him. Frostfire tensed, trembling under Jon's seat. He urged the dragon gently with voice and touch, and Frostfire lurched forward, beating its wings. They lifted unevenly at first, then caught the updraft, rising higher. Jon's heart hammered with adrenaline. In moments, they were airborne, Frostfire climbing behind Drogon. The wind stung Jon's face, tears gathering at the corners of his eyes. He clung to the harness, guiding the young dragon as best he could. Frostfire emitted a keening roar, uncertain but defiant, and they climbed above the ridge. Beneath them, the north spread out in a patchwork of snowy fields and dark pine forests. Jon cast a glance at Drogon, who glided ahead with Daenerys on his back. The older dragon's wingspan was colossal, the sunlight glinting off black scales. Now and then, Drogon swiveled his head to regard Frostfire as though measuring this newcomer. Frostfire hissed, but it did not break away. Despite the difference in size, a tenuous acceptance seemed to form in the cold air. For a brief span, the 2 dragons flew side by side, Daenerys and Jon each feeling the rush of the wind, the pounding hearts of their mounts. Jon felt something like exhilaration, a reflection of that moment long ago when he first flew beside her on Regal. But overshadowing it was a deep sadness for all they had lost. They circled once, then Drogon roared, a command from Daenerys to land. He descended smoothly, claws tearing up the snow as he touched down in a clearing near the meadow. Frostfire followed, dropping more awkwardly but managing a decent landing. Jon slid off, heart racing, while Daenerys dismounted with a fluid grace. Their guards rushed forward, startled by the spectacle of 2 dragons returning at once. Arya, Tormund, and the Targaryen knights formed a wide circle, hands on weapons in case the dragons turned on each other. But the beasts merely hissed and stamped the ground, unsettled but not hostile. Daenerys brushed back a loose strand of silver hair, her cheeks flushed from the cold air. She looked at Jon with an expression he couldn't fully decipher, part longing, part resignation. So, she murmured, it seems they can tolerate each other, at least for a while. Jon nodded, stroking Frostfire's neck. That's something, isn't it? She inhaled as though tasting the crisp winter wind. It is. Perhaps a sign that we can too. They stood in silence for a long moment, the 2 dragons breathing clouds of steam behind them. Then Daenerys sighed, turning to Mount Drogon once more. I'll return to Winterfell for now. But soon I must head south before the snows trap us here. Jon bowed his head. Safe travels, your grace. She paused, looking at him. Stay true to your word, Jon Snow. And if the day comes when I call you south, remember this morning. Remember that our dragons flew together, not as enemies. With that, she gave the command and Drogon sprang into the air. Frostfire roared, but Jon kept it from chasing after the older dragon, sensing the rivalry that simmered beneath the surface. Daenerys' silhouette receded into the gray sky, leaving Jon with a mixture of relief and regret. True to her words, Daenerys departed Winterfell within the week, taking her army back toward the more temperate south. She left behind a solemn promise to uphold their truce as long as Jon did not betray her. Jon stood on the ramparts, watching the column of black and red vanish into the snowy distance. He felt no triumph, only a weary sense of relief that immediate conflict had been avoided. The North returned to its own affairs, fortifying against undead remnants, rationing food for the harsh winter, training its soldiers. Frostfire continued to grow, strengthening its bond with Jon, practicing flight until it could remain aloft for long stretches. Word spread throughout Westeros that the North harbored a dragon under Jon Snow's guardianship, but that the Queen had met with him and left without violence. Some said it was a sign of peace, others whispered that a confrontation was merely postponed. Bran's visions continued to hint at dark stirrings beyond the wall, and Tormund's ravens spoke of strange sightings at the edge of the Frostfangs. Daenerys might have marched away, but the shadows in the far north remained. Jon knew that his ultimate battle might not be with the Queen, but with the encroaching remnants of icy death. If that day came, he would stand with Frostfire once more, blade in hand, fire against the darkness. Yet for now, the realm held its breath, caught between 2 storms, one of ice, one of uncertain fire. And in the quiet center stood Jon Snow, the man of 2 worlds, bound to a dragon born beneath Winterfell's crypts. He would guard that bond with every drop of resolve he had, hoping against all odds that the fragile peace they had pieced together would endure. If not, then the North and Frostfire both would rise to defend the living, come what may. Night fell over Winterfell, the courtyard silent save for the soft rustle of Frostfire's wings as it settled into sleep. Jon gazed at the creature's sleek form, silver scales reflecting faint moonlight, and felt a surge of fierce affection. So long as he breathed, no one would tear them apart, not the undead, not the Queen, not old hatreds or new ambitions. In that fragile alliance between ice and fire lay the realm's best chance for survival. He turned away, heading inside as the snow fell in quiet drifts, mindful of the long road yet ahead. But for tonight, at least, there was peace and the promise of a new dawn, one shaped not by one dragon's fury but by the shared courage of many. And if that promise ever faltered, Jon Snow would be there to see it held aloft, come winter's chill or dragon's flame, for he was and would always be a guardian of the living. Bound by blood and oath to the North and to the secret fire that had hatched beneath its ancient stone. Jon Snow's boots left faint impressions in the fresh fallen snow as he returned to Winterfell's inner corridors, leaving Frostfire to a well-deserved rest in the courtyard. The castle was silent apart from the crackle of distant hearths and the muted calls of guards on their patrols. The hush allowed him to think more clearly, but it also gave space for old anxieties to creep in. Daenerys Targaryen had departed for the south, leaving behind a precarious truce. The North still harbored a new dragon that had become both symbol and potential lightning rod for conflict, and the threat of undead remnants loomed in the far north like a brooding storm cloud. He made his way to a small solar near the Great Hall, a chamber that once belonged to Maester Luwin. Though Winterfell now had a new maester, Jon kept the small room as his personal study of sorts, a quiet place where he might organize letters and review reports. The fire had been laid earlier by a dutiful steward, and low flames cast dancing shadows across a clutter of scrolls and maps. Jon shrugged out of his cloak, draping it over the back of a chair. He stared at the table. Stacks of correspondence from northern lords, from Tormund's scouts, from uncertain Riverland bannermen all vied for attention. He rubbed his temple, exhausted. War, alliances, half-whispered bargains, he loathed the endless web of politics, but there was no escape. Frostfire's very existence thrust him back into the center of a realm that never fully settled its debts. He sank into a chair, letting out a slow breath. If he closed his eyes, he could see Daenerys's face as she bid him farewell, both of them stiff with wary respect that masked deeper sorrows. He remembered the swirl of wind beneath Drogon's wings. That flight with Frostfire had been an uneasy, fragile dance. Yet for a moment it hinted at what might still be possible, 2 dragons, 2 riders, not as enemies but as allies. Perhaps, in time, the realm could learn to trust both beasts and learn to trust itself again. A soft knock roused him. He turned to see Sansa stepping inside. She looked pale, her red hair catching the firelight in muted sparks. "I thought I might find you here," she said gently. "It's late, Jon. You should rest." He gestured to the mess on the table. "I wanted to review the scouts' latest reports. Tormund wrote from beyond the wall, he believes there might be a growing power in the frozen shore. Something that reanimates the dead, though not in the same manner as the Night King." Sansa's mouth set in a grim line. "These rumors are spreading. Some say there are cultists worshipping the memory of the White Walkers, others speak of some dark spirit left behind." Jon nodded. "Whatever it is, we can't ignore it. We'll need to send forces north to investigate again. The last time we did so, it was only a small raiding party. This IME, we might need more." She stepped closer, her fur-lined slippers whispering on the flagstones. "You can't keep trying to handle everything alone," she said, her tone soft yet firm. "You have allies now. Manderly left men here. The Mormonts are at your call. And Daenerys, for all the tension between you, is not blind to the undead threat. If you send word, she might send reinforcements." Jon let out a wry laugh. "If I ask for her help, it might just serve to remind her that Frostfire belongs with her. I'm trying not to provoke more claims." Sansa's lips thinned. "The realm may not care if it's your claim or hers, so long as the undead remain the bigger threat. People rally against the dead. If they learn you're uniting with Daenerys to push back a resurgence, you might garner more support, or at least more fear." He stared at the table, a swirl of thoughts colliding. "That's the question, isn't it? If Daenerys sees me as an ally, truly, then perhaps this is an opportunity. But if she views me as a rival who must be kept in check, requesting her aid might confirm her suspicions that I'm weak. That Frostfire is not enough." Sansa placed a hand on his shoulder. "You worry too much about how others see you. We need to think of the north. If an undead resurgence truly brews, we cannot weather it alone, no matter how formidable Frostfire is." He raised his gaze to hers, feeling both gratitude and frustration. "I know. I can't forget King's Landing. I can't forget how Daenerys used her dragons when she felt cornered. If the realm stands on a razor's edge, she might." Sansa's voice tightened. "I remember as well. But the alternative is to face these threats with too few men. Winterfell might be strong, but it's not invincible. Think carefully, Jon. The realm changed after the war, and we've all changed with it." Before he could reply, another knock came at the door. Arya entered, quiet as a cat. She glanced between them, reading the tension in their faces. "Should I come back later?" Jon shook his head. "No, it's fine. Did you need something?" She tugged at the collar of her tunic, the faintest hint of uncertainty in her eyes. "I've been speaking with the castle guard. They reported seeing strange lights beyond the northern horizon last night, flickers like distant fires or maybe something else. One man swears he saw shapes moving through the snow far off." Sansa sighed. "More rumors. Gods, will we ever have peace?" Arya lifted a shoulder in a half-shrug. "Just be aware. If it's more undead stirring, or wildling clans beyond the wall, or something else entirely, we should keep watch." Jon's jaw set. "We will. I'll arrange extra patrols outside the walls, set watchers in the higher towers. Winterfell's used to heavy snow, but we can't let anything slip by unseen." They spoke a while longer, deciding which men would stand guard at night, which outlying villages needed more protection. At length, Sansa insisted again that Jon get some rest, or at least try. He relented, exhaustion pressing on him like a weight. When he finally returned to his chamber, the castle was hushed in the small hours. A single candle flickered on his table, casting faint light across sparse furniture. He lay down, mind churning with thoughts of undead, alliances, and dragons. Sleep did not come easily, and when it did, it brought dreams of twisting shadows in the far north, of ice-wreathed whites surging toward Winterfell, frostfire's roar echoing through a sky stained red with fire. He woke before dawn, covered in cold sweat. Feeling restless, he dressed in warm leathers and a heavy cloak, then slipped down to the courtyard to check on Frostfire. The dragon was curled near a vent of the castle's natural heat, tail wrapped around its body. The moment Jon approached, Frostfire stirred, head lifting to greet him with a soft, rolling chirp. Jon crouched, laying a gloved hand on the dragon's scaly neck. "Sorry to wake you," he murmured. "I needed to see you." Frostfire blinked, then stood, stretching its wings. They had grown significantly in the last few weeks, the membrane thickening, the wingspan broadening. The silver-blue sheen of its scales caught the early gray light of a sky that promised fresh snow. An icy gust swept through the courtyard, ruffling the dragon's crest of spines. "How do we keep you safe from those who'd take you?" Jon mused quietly. "How do we keep everyone safe?" Frostfire exhaled, a plume of frosty breath escaping its nostrils. Its gaze held a steady kind of trust in Jon, as though certain that wherever he led, the dragon would follow. For a moment, Jon felt a surge of warmth in his chest, and he remembered that not so long ago he had been uncertain whether the egg would ever hatch. Now here stood a living symbol of the union of ice and fire, like a second chance for a realm battered by war. By the time the sun rose, Jon had resolved to organize another expedition north. If Tormund's reports were true, the threat of undead stragglers or some dark force uniting them needed to be addressed. He would bring a reasonable force, fewer than last time, to keep it subtle but enough to handle trouble. He began making preparations immediately. Within days, he had assembled a column of 50 men, a mix of northern soldiers, free folk volunteers who had settled around the gift, and a handful of Manderly men. Arya insisted on coming. Sansa wanted him to take a larger army, but Jon argued that mobility was crucial in the winter snows and that he did not want to leave Winterfell underdefended. In truth, he also feared drawing too much attention. Even a rumor that a large northern host was mustering might spur other lords or Daenerys' watchers to suspect an uprising. He decided against taking Frostfire this time. The dragon could handle short flights and had proven invaluable in the last major clash, but an extended trek through harsh blizzards might strain it. Moreover, leaving Winterfell vulnerable to infiltration by unscrupulous opportunists if he took Frostfire away posed another risk. Sansa, Lady Alysanne Mormont, and a rotating guard of loyal soldiers would keep watch on the dragon. On the morning of departure, Jon stood at the gates, Ghost at his side, ensuring each pack horse was loaded with enough provisions. The men wore heavy furs, hoods pulled low against the biting cold. Arya checked her weapons, adjusting the straps of her sword belt. She caught Jon's eye. "Ready?" He nodded, though a sense of foreboding weighed on him. He felt the press of obligations from every side. The North expected him to root out the undead, Daenerys expected him not to provoke conflict, Tormund expected him to uphold the old alliance with the free folk. And overshadowing it all was Frostfire, the dragon that many believed could tip the scales in any war. He glanced back once more at Winterfell's courtyard. Frostfire perched on a low rise of stone, watching him with alert blue eyes. The wind tossed snow across the dragon's scales, but Frostfire remained still, as if memorizing the sight of Jon departing. Jon raised a hand in a silent farewell, then turned away to mount his horse. The gates creaked open, and the column set forth into the pale morning. They traveled slowly, the roads thick with snow, each breath clouding the cold air. Ghost loped ahead, occasionally glancing back to ensure Jon followed. A hush blanketed the forests they passed, as though the entire world awaited some great upheaval. At night, they made camp beneath the shelter of pines, building careful fires and posting double watches. Arya was often the first to volunteer for night shifts. She perched on a stump, scanning the darkness with keen eyes. On the fourth day, they reached the new gift, the stretch of land once granted to the Night's Watch, now shared by some free folk settlers. Smoke rose from a handful of cabins, and children peeked out cautiously. Jon dismounted, going to speak with the local elder, a middle-aged woman named Elsha who had survived the long night. She confirmed rumors of strange sightings, silhouettes on the horizon at dusk, strange tracks in the snow that sometimes led nowhere. Livestock disappeared from locked barns only for their frozen remains to be found miles away, apparently not upon. Tormund had passed this way a fortnight prior, she said, heading further north. No one had seen him since. Jon thanked her, leaving a few extra supplies for the settlement. The older woman grasped his arm. "Stop this evil, Lord Snow," she pleaded. We can't go through another long night. We'll do our best, Jon promised. They pressed onward. The wind turned sharper, the terrain more unforgiving. The trees grew sparse and barren hills of ice and rock dominated the horizon. Sometimes the riders spotted wolf tracks or glimpsed herds of elk in the distance. But on the seventh day they found something more ominous, footprints in the snow that looked half-human, half-clawed, strewn across a frozen stream. The prints reeked of the unnatural as though the creature had too many bones in each foot. Ghost sniffed them and growled low in his throat, hackles raised. They followed the trail, hearts pounding. Arya rode near Jon, her expression grim. "What are we dealing with?" she muttered. "It doesn't look like a standard white's print." Jon surveyed the tracks. Maybe some mutated undead beast? Or worse, a new form of white. The dead don't always follow the shapes they held in life. Another day's travel brought them to a small encampment of free folk pitched near the foothills. Soot-stained tents huddled in the snow and the meager fires flickered like dying embers. The people's faces were gaunt, eyes shadowed by fear. When Jon approached, a tall, scarred man rushed up to him. "They took our scouts," he gasped, voice tremulous. "We found footprints in the morning, leading off into the hills. We tried to follow, but a storm came. Now the footprints are gone, and so are our men." Jon tightened his grip on the reins. "We'll help search." "Did Tormund pass through here?" The man's eyes flicked with recognition. "Aye, Tormund came. He heard rumors of missing people, went deeper into the foothills with a band of fighters. We've not seen him since." A knot of worry formed in Jon's chest. Tormund, bold to a fault, might have stumbled into a danger beyond anything they'd faced since the Night King's defeat. Jon directed his men to set up a more permanent camp near the free folk tents. They needed a defensible position before venturing further. The days were short, the cold so bitter it threatened to freeze the blood in their veins. Once the camp was established, Jon convened his group around a large fire. Arya stood close, warming her hands, while a few free folk joined them. A tall, wiry woman named Brenna claimed to have glimpsed a figure at dusk walking across the tundra in a staggering gait. It looked half-skeleton, she whispered, eyes wide, with antlers or horns jutting from its skull. It carried something in its arms. Another free folk man described hearing distant howls that didn't sound like wolves. Every tale contradicted the other, but they all agreed on one thing: something unnatural was out there, snatching travelers, leaving torn corpses or no trace at all. The temperature plummeted further as they spoke, as if the night itself abhorred such stories. That night, Jon slept fitfully. In his dreams, he roamed a frozen expanse, calling Tormund's name. The wind answered with shrieks that sounded almost human. He saw shapes in the blowing snow, twisted silhouettes with glowing eyes. Then a great roaring flame appeared and he glimpsed Frostfire's silhouette overhead, wings beating frantically. The dragon's flame lit the ice, revealing legions of dead trapped below, their hands clawing at the surface. He woke in a cold sweat, Ghost pressing close, offering warmth and comfort. Jon steadied his breathing, reminding himself it was only a dream. Yet dreams in the north had a habit of echoing truths. He resolved that in the morning they'd form a scouting party to probe the foothills, no matter the risk. Come morning, the wind battered their camp, scattering snow across the tents. Visibility was poor, but Jon led a group of 10, including Arya and 2 free folk hunters, into the hills. The rest stayed to guard the camp. They trudged onward, the snowdrifts growing deeper. The hunters guided them through narrow defile where the wind funneled in shrieking gusts. The air smelled of ice and pine sap tinged with decay. Halfway up a ridge, Ghost halted, ears pricked. Jon signaled the group to stop. He heard it then, a faint moaning carried by the wind, echoing through the rock crevices. As one, they turned to see, behind a tangle of frost-laden boulders, a body half buried in the snow. It wore scraps of fur that might have once belonged to a free folk scout. Jon hurried over, drawing Longclaw. Arya circled warily, scanning for threats. The body was that of a middle-aged man, eyes wide in terror, mouth gaping. His chest had been torn open by something with claws or sharp blades. The blood was frozen black. No footprints remained, erased by the ever-shifting drifts. The group exchanged grim looks. One of the free folk swore softly. "We have to find the rest. They might still be alive." They pushed on, dread growing with every step. After another hour, the moaning grew louder, resolving into a kind of half-human wail. They climbed a rocky outcrop and looked down into a hollow. There, half hidden by leaning pines, stood a small cave opening. Bones littered the entrance, carcasses of elk, wolf, and what looked sickeningly like human remains. A flicker of movement caught Jon's eye, a hunched figure dragging something into the cave. Arya sucked in a breath. "What is that?" The shape was a twisted mockery of a man, its spine bent unnaturally, skin pallid and patched with frost, long fingers tipped with claws. Jon's heart raced. "A White Walker?" No, the aura was different. It looked more savage, like a white that had broken free from ordinary rules or had been crafted with darker magic. He signaled silently and the group crept closer, using boulders as cover. Ghost slunk forward, hackles raised. The creature dragged a limp form that might have been one of the missing free folk scouts. Blood smeared the snow. A second shape emerged from the cave, a tall, gaunt figure wearing tatters of black cloth, the visage locked in a deathly rictus grin. Antlers of twisted bone sprouted from its brow. The first figure noticed them. It let out a shriek that jolted the air. The second figure's eyes gleamed with eerie light, and it turned with an almost regal air as if offended at the interruption. The shriek summoned half a dozen more wights from the cave, each in various states of decay, some with animal-like distortions. "Form up!" Jon shouted, raising Longclaw. The group spread out, weapons at the ready, though fear churned in every belly. Arya drew her blade, eyes hard. The lead wight, crowned with bone antlers, hissed something unintelligible, a sound that made the hairs on Jon's neck stand up. Then the creatures attacked. They bounded across the snow with ghastly speed, claws scrabbling at the ground. Jon met one with a swing of Valyrian steel, lopping off its arm. The thing screeched but lunged again. Ghost leapt onto another, jaws tearing at its throat. Arya danced aside a wight that tried to flank her, stabbing it through the spine. The antlered figure hung back, raising its clawed arms as if in command. One of the free folk froze mid-swing, his eyes rolling back in his head, and he collapsed, limbs twitching. Jon could only guess it was some vile sorcery. Gritting his teeth, he hacked through the wight in front of him, then barreled toward the leader. It turned its deathly grin on him, the antlers casting spidery shadows on the snow. Up close, Jon saw its eyes were milky, swirling with faint purple lights. It let out a guttural laugh and slashed at him with elongated fingers. Jon barely parried in time, stumbling back. The creature's strength was monstrous. He felt an icy burn where its claws grazed his gauntlet. Arya darted in from behind, trying to drive her blade into the creature's spine. The white whirled with uncanny speed, knocking her aside. Jon lunged, aiming for its neck. Metal met bone with a sickening crunch, but the blow only half severed the twisted vertebrae. The creature hissed in pain or rage, then hammered Jon's arm with inhuman force, numbing it. Ghost snarled, leaping onto the wight's back, snapping at the base of the antlers. The creature howled. Arya recovered, diving low to slash at its knees. Jon rallied, thrusting Longclaw forward. This time, the blade sank deep into its chest, and purple wisps of foul energy seeped out. With a final strangled hiss, the wight collapsed, limbs spasming, then went limp. The rest of the wights fell back as if the puppet strings had been cut, stumbling or collapsing entirely. One or two tried to flee into the cave. Jon's men chased them, cutting them down before they could vanish into the darkness. Then a terrible silence settled over the hollow. Panting, Jon and Arya exchanged a tense nod. The fallen creature with bone antlers lay sprawled in the snow, the antlers already flaking to dust. "What in the seven hells was that?" Arya asked, wiping her blade on the furs of a dead wight. Jon shook his head, unsettled. Something new, or maybe something old. Some twisted form of wight with its own will. One of the free folk, breathing hard, knelt to examine the body. "I've heard legends of necromancers in the deep north," he muttered, "but never believed them. Always figured the Night King was the only one. Yet here we are." They found no sign of Tormund among the remains scattered at the cave entrance. However, they did discover two living prisoners inside, bound with sinew and partially frozen. One was delirious with cold, the other unconscious. Jon's group rescued them at once, carrying them back to camp for healing. Of Tormund, there was no trace. That night, tensions in the camp ran high. The two rescued free folk, once conscious enough to speak, babbled about more creatures prowling the hills, capturing anyone they could. Neither had seen Tormund, but one said she had heard his voice echoing through the stone a few days prior. "They dragged him deeper into some underground tunnels," she moaned. "I heard him cursing them, telling them to fight face to face." Jon's face darkened. "We need to go back. If Tormund's alive, we can't abandon him." Arya's jaw tightened. "We almost lost men today just facing a handful of these things. If there are more in underground tunnels, it'll be even more dangerous." Jon nodded. "We'll need more numbers. I'll send a raven to Winterfell tonight, requesting reinforcements. We'll hold here until they arrive." Arya looked grim but resolute. "I'm with you." Two ravens were dispatched. One was intended for Lady Alysanne Mormont, whose warriors had proven themselves time and again. The other was for Sansa directly, urging her to send additional men if possible and warning her that the threat was more organized than random wights. Jon hesitated before writing a third letter, this one addressed to Queen Daenerys Targaryen. In the end, he decided against it. The truce with her was tenuous, and summoning her might bring complications. The North needed to handle its own for now, especially if Daenerys' arrival might provoke new power struggles. Days passed, and the weather worsened. Blizzards rolled over the foothills, burying any fresh tracks. Twice, the camp had to dig themselves out from under drifting snow. Moral: he dipped, despite Arya's efforts to keep the men motivated. Free folk scouts returned with no sign of Tormund or the main nest of the monstrous whites. Occasionally, distant howls echoed across the night, whether from wolves or something else, no one could be certain. At last, riders from Winterfell appeared on the horizon, 30 men led by a tough old sergeant named Harlan Stone, accompanied by 10 Mormont warriors under the banner of the Bear. They arrived half-frozen but resolute, bearing fresh supplies and a terse note from Sansa. She wished them luck, reminding Jon to remain vigilant and to remember that the realm's eyes were on him. With reinforcements, Jon felt more confident. He mustered a party of 70 warriors in total and advanced deeper into the foothills, methodically searching for caves or hidden tunnels. Ghost scouted ahead, sometimes vanishing for hours among the rocky crags, always returning with fresh tension in his posture. Along the way, they found more grisly evidence: a battered shield, a tattered scrap of Tormund's cloak, half buried in the snow. It was enough to keep them moving. On the third day of their renewed search, they stumbled upon a cleft in the hills that funneled into a wide mouth of an underground cavern. A foul stench wafted out, and the light of their torches revealed claw marks on the walls, old blood frozen in black streaks. Jon advanced carefully with Arya at his side, hearts pounding in unison. "Keep a tight formation," he ordered softly. "We don't know how many are in there." They lit more torches, dividing into 2 squads. One would hold the entrance, the other would venture deeper. Fear clung to every breath, but so did resolve. They pressed in, boots crunching over loose stones. The passage sloped downward, the ceiling dripping with icy stalactites. Now and then they heard distant scuttling, as if something skittered away before them. A raw cry echoed from somewhere below, too distant to identify. Arya caught Jon's eye, and they exchanged a look of grim determination. They had to move quickly. If Tormund was still alive, every moment counted. Suddenly, a shrieking mass of whites sprang out of side passages, half a dozen at once, twisted as before, some with bony protrusions like horns or elongated jaws. The torches reflected in their lifeless eyes. Jon's men raised weapons, the fight erupting in a confined space that left no room for error. Longclaw flashed in the torchlight as Jon parried a white's frenzied swipes. Arya ducked under another's claw, driving her steel into its spine. The Mormont warriors roared, hacking apart rotted limbs that flailed at them. The creatures moved with savage speed, but they lacked the disciplined coordination of living foes. One warrior collapsed under a white's weight, screaming, only for Arya to whirl around and stab the creature off him. Ghost lunged at a white's back, teeth sinking into its neck. With a sickening crack, the white's head tore away, its body flopping. Another white slashed at a torchbearer, knocking the torch aside. The flame sputtered, shadows dancing wildly. Jon seized the chance to drive Longclaw through the white's chest, pinning it to the cavern wall. The melee ended in a few heartbeats that felt like an eternity. Most of the whites lay dismembered on the ground, twitching. 2 of Jon's men were wounded but still mobile. They had to act before more emerged. They pressed onward, stumbling through twisting tunnels. Now and then they found side chambers strewn with bones and half-decayed bodies. It seemed these creatures collected flesh, a sick ritual. The stench was unbearable, enough to make seasoned warriors gag. Finally, they heard a voice echoing through the stone, faint but unmistakable, Tormund's unmistakable bellow. Jon's heart lifted even as dread coiled in his gut. He motioned for silence, and they followed the sound down a narrow passage, forced to move single file. The walls pressed in, dripping with icy condensation. The tunnel opened into a wide cavern, lit by an eerie bluish glow emanating from clusters of crystal-like formations in the rock. At the center stood a crude altar of stone, smeared with blackish blood. Tormund was chained to a pillar nearby, his flaming red hair matted with sweat and grime. Around him circled 3 of those bone-crowned whites, each wearing some approximation of tattered cloaks. At the far side, more twisted shapes lurked in the gloom. Tormund spotted Jon's group. "About bloody time," he roared, though his voice sounded hoarse. "They've been chanting or moaning some nonsense for days." The whites snapped their gazes toward the intruders. One let out a piercing shriek, calling more undead from the shadows. Jon counted at least a dozen. This was the lair, the heart of their abominations. "Charge!" Jon shouted. He and Arya led the way, surging toward Tormund. Their men fanned out to engage the whites. The bone-crowned creatures snarled, flaring clawed hands, arcs of strange purple light dancing along their limbs. Jon braced himself for more of that foul magic. One such creature swung a staff-like bone at him, crackling with necrotic energy. Jon ducked, feeling the air sizzle above his head. Arya went low, slicing at its knees, but the wight leaped impossibly high, landing behind them. Another wight lunged, forcing Jon to pivot, Longclaw meeting rotting flesh. A chaotic melee erupted around the altar. Tormund strained against his chains, cursing. One of the bone-crowned wights sidled close, as though preparing to complete some dark ritual. Jon saw a jagged blade in its hand, stained with black residue. He broke away from the fight, sprinting toward Tormund. A wight intercepted him, screeching and swinging at his face. Jon gritted his teeth, parrying with Longclaw. Out of the corner of his eye he saw Arya dash forward, driving her blade into the wight's back. The creature shuddered and fell away. Jon lunged the last few steps, slashing at the bone-crowned wight that threatened Tormund. It whirled, antlers scraping the cavern ceiling. Purple light crackled in its eyes, and it hissed a string of guttural syllables. A wave of cold slammed into Jon, nearly knocking him off his feet. Frost crawled up his legs, threatening to encase him. He gasped, forcing his limbs to move. Longclaw's Valyrian steel vibrated in his grip as though resisting the magic. He pressed forward, hacking at the wight's arm. Steel met bone with a horrifying shriek. The wight's arm parted at the elbow, the necrotic flesh flaking away. Tormund let out a wild laugh, though it was ragged with fatigue. "Cut it down, Snow." The wight hissed again, trying to raise its remaining hand. Arya suddenly appeared behind it, plunging her blade through its ribcage. With both arms pinned, it could do little more than thrash. Jon seized the chance, raising Longclaw and bringing it down on the wight's neck, severing the skull that bore the twisted antlers. With a flare of purple sparks, the creature collapsed into dust and rotted sinew. Jon rushed to Tormund, fumbling for a key on the wight's disintegrating remnants. Finding nothing, he snarled in frustration. "Arya, can you pick these locks?" She nodded, producing a thin dagger from her belt. "Give me space." She knelt at the shackles, quickly working the metal. Meanwhile, the rest of Jon's men battled fiercely in the cavern. Sporadic bursts of purple magic flickered among them, each pulse met with screams or grunts of effort. Jon spun around, scanning for the other bone-crowned wights. He saw one on the far side of the altar, pinned by two Mormont warriors who hacked it to pieces. Another forced 3 men to retreat, conjuring shards of ice from the ground. Ghost, wounded but unrelenting, launched himself at that one's flank, dragging it down. Jon hurried to help, charging the wight from behind. With Ghost tearing at its side, the creature was off balance. Jon's blade cleaved into its skull, extinguishing the purple glow. The final bone-crowned wight fell. The lesser undead collapsed in disarray, though a few still lashed out. The men methodically destroyed them, ensuring no peace might rise again. Soon, the cavern fell silent except for the ragged breathing of the survivors and the crackling echoes of the strange crystals. Arya freed Tormund's shackles with a triumphant grunt, helping him stand. He staggered, then pulled Jon into a bear hug. "You took your time, you wretched crow," he rasped, though tears gleamed in his eyes. "Thought I was a goner." Jon returned the embrace, relief washing over him. "We came as soon as we heard." Tormund's gaze drifted to the remains of the bone-crowned wights. What in all the gods' names were those? They were chanting, trying to... I don't even know. Something about building an army for a new night. Jon grimaced. They're unlike anything we've seen. Some twisted form of necromancy. But we've ended it here, at least. A moan from one of Jon's wounded men reminded them that the fight had come at a cost. Several were down, injured by claws or bursts of vile magic. The living helped each other to patch wounds, gather the dead, and break the crude altar. Tormund insisted on smashing it himself with a large hammer, cursing with every blow until the stone was rubble. Once sure the cavern was purged of threats, Jon led the group out into the open air. The sky above was dull gray, spitting snow. They carried the injured and the dead. Jon felt a mixture of triumph at having destroyed this nest, sorrow at the losses, and a deep unease about the nature of these abominations. That night, back at camp, Tormund devoured half a haunch of venison, regaining some of his vigor. He explained what had happened. He'd followed rumors of missing free folk, only for these creatures to ambush his party. Some men were killed outright, others dragged away. Tormund himself had been kept prisoner while the bone-crowned wights muttered about needing a living sacrifice to empower their dark rituals. Arya leaned forward, expression grim. So they're not simple wights. They have intelligence. Seemed so, Tormund agreed. They were cunning, as if they served a master. But I never saw anyone else, just those twisted devils. Maybe they served one of their own. Or maybe they answered to some spirit deeper in the ice. Jon tossed another log onto the fire, sparks shooting up. We ended them here, but there may be more layers. We have to keep searching or at least warn the entire north. The mention of warnings stirred a fresh knot in his gut. He remembered how Daenerys had insisted she be informed of any undead resurgence. Yet involving her too soon might lead to friction. Then again, if the north could not contain these new abominations alone, ignoring her offer could be disastrous. He and Arya discussed it in low voices, away from the others. She watched him with those sharp gray eyes. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "Summon Daenerys' help or keep this quiet?" Jon rubbed at his beard, a habit when deep in thought. "These creatures are dangerous, but so far we've handled them. If we discover evidence of a larger force, I might have no choice but to call on Daenerys. The North can't face a full-scale undead army alone, not in winter." Arya nodded reluctantly. "I won't question your decision. Just be mindful if Daenerys brings her armies and Drogon north again, the old wounds might reopen. Some lords will see it as an invasion, no matter her reasons. And if Frostfire is still at Winterfell, she might want to claim it." Jon exhaled, frustration mounting. "Everything's a double-edged blade. For now, let's finish cleansing this region. We'll send scouts further. Then we'll decide." The next week was spent systematically searching the foothills. They located and destroyed 2 more small clusters of undead, though none were led by bone-crowned whites. Most seemed disorganized, as if the controlling entity had perished in the cavern. They freed a few more captives and found numerous corpses. The land was scarred by something dark and hungry, but it seemed they had severed its head. With Tormund recovered enough to fight, morale rose. Eventually, the storms intensified to the point that travel became treacherous. Jon decided they had done all they could for now. Leading the combined force, they began the return journey to Winterfell, hearts heavy with the knowledge of how close the North had come to another undead scourge and how easily such threats might rise again. They arrived at Winterfell amid a fresh snowfall, greeted by Sansa's relief and the watchful gaze of the guards. Frostfire screeched from the courtyard wall, launching into a short flight over the battlements to meet them. Jon dismounted, smiling wearily as the dragon landed, stirring flurries of snow around its feet. Ghost wagged his tail, bounding up to greet his old friend. Frostfire pressed its snout to Jon's chest, rumbling softly. The warmth of its breath felt like a blessing after so many days of bitter cold. Jon patted its scaled head. "I missed you too," he murmured. Sansa, wrapped in thick furs, ushered them inside the great hall for warmth. Food and drink awaited. Tormund nearly danced with joy at the sight of roasted meats and ale. The men settled in, exchanging stories. Meanwhile, Sansa pulled Jon aside, quietly pressing him for details. He explained everything, the bone-crowned whites, their lair, the battered altars, Tormund's rescue. Sansa paled at the mention of necromantic magic. "This can't be coincidence, Jon. Someone or something is experimenting with the power once wielded by the White Walkers." "Agreed," Jon said grimly. "We might have destroyed the nest, but the knowledge remains out there. Could be there are others scattered across the far north or beyond." She shook her head. "We need a plan to handle this if it grows again. Word is already spreading among the small folk about strange whites. The Riverlands might hear soon. And the crown." Jon set his jaw. "Then we must prepare. The North must stand ready, and we need to inform our allies. Whether we involve Daenerys remains the question." Sansa studied him, her features tight with concern. "You've returned just in time. Lord Wyman Mandoli is here, waiting to speak with you about renewed trade routes, though I suspect he also wants news about the undead. And Lady Alysanne Mormont left a message, urging caution but pledging her swords if needed. The Vale sent a raven as well, curious about rumors that the North discovered a new breed of undead." Jon closed his eyes for a moment, exhausted from the weight of leadership. "Let's gather them all for a council. The more they know, the better prepared we'll be. Then we can decide on calling Daenerys." Sansa nodded. "Very well. Rest now, Jon. You look ready to collapse." He managed a thin smile. "Thank you, Sansa." After ensuring the men were settled, Jon slipped away to check on Frostfire again. The dragon had returned to its usual spot near the vented warmth of the courtyard wall. As Jon approached, he noticed fresh scratches in the ground, as though Frostfire had been pacing. The dragon's eyes flicked to him, reflecting torchlight, and it let out a low rumble. A stable boy lingered nearby, wide-eyed. "It's been restless since yesterday," the boy whispered, pacing back and forth, making those growly noises. Jon laid a hand on the dragon's side. "What's wrong?" he murmured, though he knew the dragon couldn't answer in words. Frostfire shuddered. A flicker of bluish flame crackled at the corners of its jaws. Its tail swished, betraying agitation. Could it sense the tension in the realm, the lingering undead presence? Or was it reacting to some other force? Jon recalled how Daenerys's dragons sometimes grew restless when threatened or when they sensed a rival. But Drogon was far to the south. He gently stroked Frostfire's neck, speaking calm words. The dragon exhaled, then settled slightly, folding its wings. Jon lingered, feeling an odd worry gnaw at him. Frostfire was no mere pet, it had instincts and an intelligence of its own. Perhaps it perceived the troubles on the horizon better than any human. In the days that followed, Jon convened a grand council in Winterfell's Great Hall. Lord Wyman Manderly attended, along with Lords Glover, Serwyn, and a few others. Lady Alysanne Mormont sent her cousin, Roanne, as an envoy. Bran sat quietly in his wheeled chair, listening, occasionally offering cryptic observations. Arya leaned against a pillar near the dais, arms folded, scanning the room with keen vigilance. Jon stood at the head of the table, explaining the recent expedition, the new undead threat, and the gruesome altars. A hushed dread settled over the lords as he described the bone-crowned wights. Several looked to Bran as if expecting him to confirm or deny. Bran only said, "I have seen flickers of a darkness that tries to mimic what the Night King once did. Fragments of old power linger in the far north. They seek to reshape it to their will." Lord Manderly's jowls quivered. "What must we do to ensure they don't succeed?" Jon spread his hands. "We stay vigilant. We patrol, we coordinate with the free folk, we stamp out any sign of these creatures before they spread. If their power grows beyond our ability to contain, we may have to ask Daenerys Targaryen to fulfill her oath to defend the realm. But for now, I propose that we stand as the North, united in this cause." Some lords shifted uneasily at the mention of Daenerys. Lady Rowan Mormont spoke up, "We'll fight these abominations, but we remember how the South once brought ruin. We prefer not to see Targaryen armies marching north again." Jon nodded. "I understand. We'll treat it as a last resort. In the meantime, I recommend each house train additional rangers specialized in winter terrain. We'll equip them with dragonglass if we can acquire enough from what remains of the old caches. We'll keep Frostfire here at Winterfell unless an emergency calls for its fire." The lords exchanged glances. Manderly rubbed his chin. "A prudent plan, though I wonder if the crown might interpret it as you building up military strength independent of them." Sansa's voice was cool. "We are free to defend ourselves against threats. The queen herself offered no immediate aid unless called upon." That ended the debate for now. They concluded with agreements to share resources, coordinate patrols, and reconvene if further attacks occurred. The lords departed Winterfell, returning to their lands to shore up defenses. The mood in the castle remained tense but resolute. Over the following weeks, winter settled deeper across the north. Blizzards battered the roads, slowing all travel to a crawl. Jon took solace in training with the men, ensuring they knew how to fight wights and handle colder conditions. He and Arya sparred in the courtyard, drawing a small crowd as they traded quicksilver strikes, each reading the other with a sibling's intuition. Ghost prowled along the perimeter, and Frostfire watched from its perch, occasionally letting out a small roar of encouragement. When not on the training ground, Jon pored over maps, cross-referencing old notes about hidden passages in the north, ancient barrows rumored to house relics of the first men. If these new wights were tapping into leftover magic, he wanted to understand how. He consulted Bran, who mentioned cryptic references in the archives about a crown of woe, a fabled artifact once used by dark sorcerers in the Age of Heroes. The bone-crowned wights reminded Bran of that legend, but the records were incomplete. The days bled one into the next, a cycle of drilling, planning, and acing for more bad news. Yet no major undead attacks were reported. The foothills seemed calm for the moment. Jon wondered if the threat had truly been quelled or if it only slumbered. Frostfire continued to grow, now large enough that Jon could fly short distances comfortably. He practiced at dawn, taking the dragon out over the snowy plains around Winterfell, never straying too far. The exhilaration of flight mingled with an undercurrent of worry about who might see, who might interpret it as a declaration of power. One crisp morning, he guided Frostfire up in a wide spiral above the castle walls. The wind buffeted him cold against his cheeks, but the dragon's body radiated warmth through the saddle. He felt that familiar surge of awe, man and dragon united. Their combined shadow swept over the courtyard, where a handful of soldiers paused to look up. Sansa, standing with a group of stewards, shielded her eyes as she watched. Jon urged Frostfire to bank left, circling around the high tower. Snow flurried past his face, stinging. He noticed movement near the gates, a rider approaching, bearing a banner that flapped in the wind. Leaning, he guided Frostfire into a controlled descent, landing just outside the main courtyard. The impact stirred snow into a cloud. Jon dismounted, patting Frostfire's flank. A stable hand ran up, wide-eyed, to assist. Jon left the dragon in his care, crossing to the gates on foot. There Sansa stood, flanked by guards. The rider was a man in a thick cloak of black and red. A Targaryen banner. Jon's heart sank. Had Daenerys sent someone else? The rider dismounted, face partially hidden by a hood. He lifted it, revealing a younger man with sharp features and a serious expression. "I bear a message from Her Grace, Queen Daenerys Targaryen," he announced, voice carrying in the cold air. "She sends word of unrest in the Crownlands and the Reach and also inquires about the rumored new threat of undead in the north. She urges unity and caution." Sansa took the scroll he offered, eyes flicking to Jon. She passed it to him. He unrolled the parchment, scanning Daenerys's words. It was couched in polite formality, referencing their earlier accord. She wrote that tension in the south was rising, some lords were questioning the crown's resources, whispers of rebellion circulated among those who feared the return of Targaryen dragons. She asked about the bone-crowned whites that her knights had reported upon returning from the last expedition. She ended by reminding Jon that if the dead gathered, she stood ready to ride north. Jon felt a complex twist of emotions, relief that she was not ignoring the undead threat, wariness that her involvement might bring more chaos. He looked to Sansa, whose expression was equally guarded. "Invite him in," Jon said quietly. "He'll need refreshment." "We'll craft a reply." They led the Targaryen envoy inside, offering a place by the fire and hot mulled wine. The man, who introduced himself as Ser Daren, spoke respectfully but kept his words measured. Jon questioned him about the southern unrest. Ser Daren revealed that small pockets of resistance had emerged in the Reach, led by minor lords who disliked being taxed heavily to rebuild King's Landing. Rumors claimed they sought to undermine Daenerys's rule. "She has it contained," he said. "But if trouble grows, she cannot send her full might north. She hopes you understand this difficulty, and will keep the realm's needs in mind if the dead truly rise again." Jon listened, remembering the wars that had ravaged Westeros. Too many times had petty rebellions ignited further bloodshed. A stable realm was vital if they were to focus on the undead. The irony that Daenerys's reputation as the breaker of chains now faced uprisings from those who once bowed to her was not lost on him. He crafted his reply carefully, stating that the North continued to watch for undead activity, that they had encountered a small necromantic threat but believed it contained for the moment. He also affirmed that if a great threat emerged, he would call on the crown for aid in defending the living. Sansa looked over his shoulder, approving the tactful tone. Ser Daren nodded, accepting the letter. "I'll depart once rested. The Queen will be glad to hear you maintain your vigilance, Lord Snow. She bade me observe, if possible, this dragon of yours, Frostfire. She remains curious." Jon couldn't help a small, wry smile. "Frostfire is no secret anymore. You're welcome to see him from a safe distance." They brought Ser Daren to the courtyard, where Frostfire had resumed its perch. The envoy's expression flickered between awe and unease. The dragon eyed him, letting out a low rumble that made him step back hastily. Sansa smothered a grin behind her hand. "Well," Ser Daren managed, "the Queen's tales do not exaggerate. It is indeed a formidable beast. May it serve the realm wisely." Jon inclined his head, hoping the man wouldn't notice the slight tension in his jaw. So many saw Frostfire as a weapon or a symbol of power. So few recognized the living creature beneath the scales. Still, the envoy meant well enough. That evening, Ser Daren departed, riding south with Jon's letter and a new swirl of uncertainties to deliver. Jon watched him go from the battlements. Arya joined him, silent at first, the wind tugging at her braid. "You're uneasy," she said at length, not a question. Jon nodded, eyes on the receding figure. "If Daenerys's hold on the south is shaky, she'll be even more protective of her claim to dragonkind. If she feels threatened, she might push north in ways we can't control." Arya's gaze swept the winter sky. "Do you still trust her?" He hesitated. "I trust her intention to save the realm from the dead. I don't fully trust her not to see Frostfire as a tool or to cling to power any way she can. She's changed, as we all have. But I remember how things ended in King's Landing." Arya nodded, placing a hand on his shoulder briefly. "Let's hope we never see a repeat of that fire and blood." In the weeks that followed, life in Winterfell settled into a tense routine. Patrols rode out in rotation bearing the cold with stoic resilience. Bran spent hours in the godwood, his eyes often rolled back in a vision trance. He offered occasional cryptic warnings of shadows still stirring in the west or old ghosts prowling. Sansa coordinated ration distribution and oversaw the fortress's repairs, always expecting the worst. Arya sparred, scouted, and kept a covert watch for potential spies in Winterfell itself. Jon devoted himself to forging unity among the northern lords. He visited houses that had been wavering, reassuring them that the dragon at Winterfell was under Stark leadership, not poised to burn them into submission. Some were won over by his honesty and the tangible presence of Frostfire's protective role. Others remained skeptical. More than once, Jon had to quell rumors that he intended to claim the Iron Throne. All the while, Frostfire grew. The dragon's flights extended further afield, sometimes patrolling alongside Jon when he rode out to inspect the farmland or assist local holdfasts. On one such journey, they encountered a pack of snow wolves harassing a merchant caravan. Frostfire's roar scattered the beasts without a single flame, demonstrating the raw power that accompanied its presence. The grateful merchants bowed fervently, their terror quickly replaced by awe. Such stories traveled, painting Frostfire as a guardian spirit of the north. Despite these small victories, Jon could not shake a sense of waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the undead to resurge, or Daenerys to arrive unannounced, or some rebellious lord to make a move. A calm in Westeros rarely lasted. One frigid afternoon, he rode back from an inspection of the granaries, accompanied by Arya and a handful of guards. Frostfire soared overhead, occasionally vanishing behind swirling snow clouds. They crested a rise, and Winterfell came into view, blanketed in white. Steam rose from the hot pools within the walls. Then Arya pointed. Smoke from the forest to the east. Jon squinted, seeing a black smudge against the snowy pines. That's not from Winterfell. Could be a campfire or something worse. They directed Frostfire to investigate while they approached on horseback. The dragon circled overhead, letting out a short, sharp cry. Jon's heart pounded. If it was a bandit camp, so be it. But if it was something else? They reached the edge of the forest to discover a cluster of armed men in the clearing, burning logs in a makeshift camp. Banners draped from poles showed unfamiliar sigils, a black scorpion on a yellow field, a gold hawk on indigo. These were not northern houses. Arya stiffened. Southerners. The men scrambled to their feet as Jon's party arrived, clearly alarmed by the presence of a dragon circling overhead. Some reached for weapons, but a tall figure in battered half-plates stepped forward, raising empty hands in a placating gesture. We mean no harm. Jon halted his horse, scanning the scene. There were perhaps 24 men, none wearing the Queen's official sigils. Mercenaries? Explorers? He set a hand on Longclaw's hilt. Who are you, and what are you doing in the north? The tall man bowed stiffly. Ser Willis Swift, once sworn to the crown. Now, well, we're seeking refuge, my lord. We march north to escape the troubles in the Reach. Arya's brow furrowed. Troubles? Rebellion? Willis nodded, sighing. Some lords in the Reach rebelled against Queen Daenerys. Others refused to oppose her openly but withheld resources. Her envoys cracked down harshly. Villages burned in the crossfire. We deserted rather than shed more innocent blood. We heard rumors the North was amassing its own forces, and we hoped, perhaps, to find a place here, away from the madness. Jon exchanged a look with Arya, uncertain. Housing deserters from the south could be interpreted as an act of defiance against Daenerys. But turning them away could condemn them to death in the winter wilds or push them into banditry. Let me see your weapons, Jon said, dismounting. He inspected their arms, swords, spears, a few crossbows, all well-worn but not quite rusted. The men looked hungry, exhausted, some nursing minor wounds. They had women and youths among them too, likely families fleeing the chaos. The stench of desperation hung about them. Arya lowered her voice, leaning into Jon. If we take them in, Daenerys might label it treason. But if we turn them away, they'll starve or freeze or worse. Jon set his jaw. We can't let them die. That's not who we are. He raised his voice so the group could hear. We'll escort you to Winterfell. You'll be given a place to stay, food, and medical care. But no violence, no thievery. You'll abide by our rules or you'll be exiled. Willis sank to one knee in gratitude. Thank you, my lord. We want only peace. Arya exhaled, tension easing. All right then. Let's see how Sansa responds to this. They broke camp together, leading the ragtag southerners toward Winterfell. Frostfire's presence kept them docile. Some gazed up at the dragon in terror, others in wonder. By the time they reached the castle gates, snow had begun falling again, blanketing them in white flakes. The gates opened, guards peering curiously at the new arrivals. Sansa greeted them with measured courtesy, summoning stewards to provide blankets and bowls of hot stew. She and Jon spoke privately afterward, discussing the political ramifications. "We'll keep them here temporarily," she decided. "They can help with repairs or farm work come spring. But we must be careful with how Daenerys might perceive this." Jon nodded. "We'll send her a message that these are refugees, not rebels. They deserted to avoid further bloodshed, or so they claim." Even as he said it, he felt a tremor of unease. Daenerys, in her letter, had mentioned rebellions in the Reach. If these men were part of it, or if the Queen believed they were, her patience with the North might fray. And with the undead threat simmering in the background, it was the last thing they needed. Soon enough, word spread through the castle that southern refugees had arrived. Reactions were mixed. Some northerners muttered about lazy southerns and feared infiltration by spies. Others showed compassion, recalling how northerners had once sought refuge after the long night's devastation. Willis Swift and his companions behaved themselves, grateful for the warmth of Winterfell's hearths and the promise of sanctuary. A week later, a courier arrived from White Harbor with tidings. A rumor had reached them that a Targaryen loyalist was riding north to Winterfell, possibly to investigate stories of desertion and the harboring of traitors. The courier could not confirm the identity or the size of the party. Jon felt his gut twist, sure that trouble was brewing. Meanwhile, Frostfire's restless behavior intensified. The dragon roamed the courtyard at odd hours, let out loud roars at night, startling the entire castle. Ghost often followed it, whining softly as if to calm the beast. Attempts to soothe Frostfire worked temporarily, but soon the agitation returned. Jon wondered if the dragon somehow sensed the tension or if an instinct warned of new danger. While these concerns weighed on him, another blow fell. A raven arrived from a distant watchtower near the shivering sea, reporting sightings of strange lights offshore, blue-green glows dancing just beneath the water's surface. Local fishermen complained of dead fish washing ashore in quantities that defied explanation. Some found the bloated remains of seals with bite marks that looked disturbingly human. Whispers spread that the undead were not confined to land alone. Jon brought this news to Sansa, Arya, and Bran, who met with him in the library tower. Bran's eyes darkened as he listened. "I have seen glimpses in my dreams, things stirring in the cold depths. Once, the White Walkers commanded creatures of ice in the oceans north of Harhome. If these remnants remain, they might be testing new waters." Sansa rubbed her temples. "Gods, is there no end to this? The realm is too divided to mount another massive campaign like before. We can't call all the banners on every rumor, but ignoring it might lead to disaster." Arya's expression hardened. "We might need Daenerys after all. If these threats multiply, we can't handle them alone." Jon paced, wrestling with the decision. If we summon her and she's embroiled in fighting rebels, how can she spare enough men or ships to help us? And if she does come, the question of Frostfire's allegiance surfaces again, plus the risk of open conflict. Bran's voice drifted distant. "Every path has risk. Yet if the undead rise in the sea or the far north, it won't matter who rules the Iron Throne. Winter will come for everyone." They decided to send scouts to investigate the coast near the Shivering Sea, accompanied by a small band of warriors to confirm the threat. Meanwhile, they would fortify White Harbor's defenses and quietly gather more information. The uneasy status quo continued. Snow fell ceaselessly, muffling the land. Frostfire's unrest worsened. One night, the dragon burst into a furious display, breathing pale blue flame at the courtyard wall, scorching the stones. Jon rushed down in alarm. It took all his calming words and gentle touch to coax Frostfire back to stillness. Sansa, woken by the commotion, found him kneeling by the dragon's head, breathing hard. "This can't go on," she said softly. "Maybe Frostfire needs more space or to hunt more. Dragons are not meant to stay penned in one courtyard." Jon realized she was right. Daenerys's dragons had roamed wide, hunting the plains. Frostfire had grown, and so had its desire to explore and assert itself. "I'll take it on a longer flight tomorrow," Jon decided. "Far from the castle, let it hunt. That might calm it." Sansa squeezed his shoulder. "Be careful." The following morning, Jon saddled Frostfire while a small group of onlookers watched nervously. Ghost whined at being left behind, but Jon worried about the hazards of having Ghost in midwinter terrain with no easy route back if trouble arose. He patted the direwolf's head. "Stay. Guard Winterfell." Frostfire leapt into the sky, carrying Jon upward with surprising ease. The updraft nearly took his breath away, but he clung to the harness, shifting his weight as he'd practiced. The dragon soared over the walls, letting out a triumphant roar. Jon guided it northeast, away from the main roads, seeking open land where the dragon could spread its wings. They flew for miles, passing over wooded valleys and frozen rivers. The cold air stung Jon's cheeks, but the exhilaration of flight burned in his veins. Frostfire seemed almost joyful, its tension replaced by the thrill of freedom. Eventually, the dragon spotted movement below, a lone elk wandering a snowy clearing. Frostfire dived, the force pressing Jon into the saddle. The elk bolted, but it stood little chance. Frostfire unleashed a burst of frosty flame that engulfed the elk, killing it instantly. The dragon landed in a spray of snow, folding its wings as it began to feed. Jon dismounted, standing guard as Frostfire feasted. He scanned the horizon warily. It felt good to be out here in the solitude of the wild, yet he couldn't fully relax, not with threats on every side. He recalled how Daenerys had once described the bond of hunting from Dragonback, how it united rider and dragon in a primal way. Now, experiencing it firsthand, he understood. The meal complete, Frostfire licked its jaws, then rumbled contentedly. Jon stroked its neck, smiling. Better, he teased softly. The dragon snorted, as if in agreement. They took off again, flying a broad loop over the forest. Jon debated returning straight to Winterfell, but Frostfire did not seem exhausted yet, and the day was still young. Perhaps they could see if the eastern horizon showed any sign of trouble near the coast. He urged the dragon higher, where the air grew thinner. The land stretched out below like a white tapestry. Dark lines of rivers snaked through the snow, distant mountains rose in jagged spines, and the sea glinted silver on the horizon. They soared for a time, scanning for any sign of movement, though from this altitude, details blurred. Suddenly, Frostfire let out a sharp cry, wings shuddering. Jon felt the dragon tense beneath him. "What is it?" he muttered, peering down. He saw nothing but a carpet of white, a dark streak of forest. Then Frostfire dived, unbidden. Jon grabbed the harness, heart lurching. Whoa! The dragon barreled downward, ignoring his attempts to steer. The wind whipped past, the ground rushing up. A sense of alarm surged through him. If Frostfire had spotted something, it might be leading them into danger. They leveled out a few hundred feet above the treetops, skimming over them until the forest parted into a wide clearing. There, among stands of leafless birches, stood a large group of men, maybe 4 or 5 dozen, some armed, some hauling what appeared to be heavy crates or barrels. The men jerked in panic at the sight of a dragon overhead, a flurry of movement. Some scattered, others raised crossbows. Jon realized at once these were no normal travelers. Their formation looked disciplined, their gear too well furnished to be mere refugees. He tried to pull Frostfire up, but the dragon roared and descended aggressively as though it sensed hostility. Arrows whistled past them. Jon ducked, heart pounding. One arrow found its mark, glancing off Frostfire's flank with a spark, failing to pierce the scales. The dragon snarled, jaws parting. Jon felt the heat gather in Frostfire's chest, the buildup of flame. "No, don't!" Jon shouted, but the dragon unleashed a burst of bright blue fire that raked the clearing. Shrieks rang out below. Men scattered, diving for cover. The crates and barrels ignited or exploded if they contained something flammable. Flames whooshed across the snow. Jon spotted at least 3 men collapse in the conflagration. He gritted his teeth, wrestling with Frostfire's instincts. Up, up. Slowly, the dragon responded, pulling out of the dive, rising above the swirling smoke. Heart-hammering, Jon surveyed the chaos below. Many survivors fled into the trees, some leaving behind the burning remains of their supplies. Others lay motionless in the snow. The question pounded in Jon's skull, who were they? Bandits, rebels from the south, or some hidden force? He could not linger to find out. More arrows flew upward, though none landed a telling blow. Frostfire soared away, still bristling with aggression. After they had covered some distance, Jon guided the dragon to a careful landing on a rocky ledge overlooking a valley. He slid off, breathing hard, scolding Frostfire. "We can't just burn people on sight." He knew the dragon acted on primal instincts to defend itself, but the results could be catastrophic. If word spread that a northern dragon burned men without warning, it might justify any number of reprisals. Frostfire lowered its head, exhaling in a mix of agitation and contrition. Its eyes glowed with an odd sorrow, if such a thing could be said of a dragon. Jon sighed, resting his forehead against the scaled muzzle. "It's all right," he whispered. "We need to be more careful." But the damage was done. He resolved to return immediately and muster a scouting party to check the site, find out who those armed men were and what they carried. If they were bandits or an invading force, Winterfell had to know. With that, Jon mounted up again, flying back to Winterfell at the fastest pace he dared. The sun was already dipping behind the clouds by the time they approached the castle. Frostfire landed in the courtyard with a thunderous flap, startling everyone present. Jon dismounted, demanding to see Sansa and Arya at once. As they rushed to the hall, he recounted what happened. Sansa looked grim. Arya's eyes narrowed. Arrows and crates in a hidden clearing. Sounds like an organized group. Could be smugglers or could be soldiers. Tormund, who had stayed in Winterfell to rest his injuries, overheard and spat on the floor. If they're from the south, creeping around, maybe they aim to undermine the north. Or they could be after the dragon. Jon raked a hand through his hair. We need to send a ground force to investigate. I feel we've sparked something by attacking them, even if it was self-defense. That's an understatement, Sansa said softly. If any survivors run south with tales of a northern dragon burning men unprovoked, Daenerys or other powers might see it as an act of war. Arya rested a hand on her blade. I'll go. We'll see who's left in that clearing, or track them if they fled. Jon nodded. Take a dozen good trackers. Move quietly. See if you can capture someone who'll talk. By dawn, Arya's party had ridden out. Jon waited anxiously for her return, pacing the courtyard with Ghost. Frostfire, exhausted from the long flight, dozed fitfully, still emitting occasional growls in its sleep. 2 days later, Arya came back, looking windburned and tense. She recounted how they found the clearing scorched and littered with charred crates. A few bodies lay frozen in the snow, but most of the group had fled. They trailed footprints leading south along a hidden path that skirted the main roads. Eventually, they caught a lone straggler who had collapsed from his burns. Arya's men bound him and questioned him. He claimed they were mercenaries and retainers hired by an ambitious southern lord who aimed to set up a secret supply line in the north, a way to funnel arms and goods for an eventual confrontation with Daenerys. The man was too delirious to provide all the details, but Arya gleaned that their employer believed Jon Snow might rise in open rebellion, and they wanted to be the first to ally with him or exploit him. Jon felt a surge of anger. So they came here to stir trouble, or at least prepare for it. And Frostfire's attack confirmed their fears that the dragon is a threat. Arya nodded. We found no sign of immediate reinforcements, but the man said more groups might be on the way. He died of his injuries before we could learn more. A grim hush settled over them. If word reached the south that a band of men was burned by Frostfire, it could spark a chain reaction of fear and aggression. If that lord or others concluded Jon intended to use the dragon to carve out a kingdom, they might rally armies to march north. Daenerys herself might see it as proof Jon was stirring rebellion. Sansa's voice shook with quiet intensity. We're on the brink, Jon. One misinterpretation could plunge us all into war. Jon stared at the battered courtyard wall where Frostfire had once unleashed flame. Now the dragon lay curled in the corner, dozing uneasily. I don't want war, he whispered. But the realm twists everything about dragons into a question of power. Tormund bellowed a curse. Then maybe we tell them all plainly. Anyone who comes north looking for a fight will get one. The undead out there are the real threat. We have no patience for petty squabbles. Arya snorted softly. That might only make them more convinced we're building an army. The question is, do we reach out to Daenerys proactively, or do we wait for her next move? Jon closed his eyes, exhaustion weighing on him. One false step and everything they'd worked for, peace, alliances, the promise of a stable future, could unravel. He pictured how easily Frostfire's flame had torn through the men in the clearing. War with the South would be catastrophic. After a long pause, he straightened, meeting Sansa's gaze. I'll write to Daenerys. I'll explain what happened, that a group of unknown armed men ambushed Frostfire, and the dragon defended itself. I'll reaffirm that I have no ambition to challenge her claim. If she truly wants to keep the realm safe, she'll see reason. Sansa nodded, though doubt flickered in her eyes. Arya offered a tight smile. It's worth a try. Jon summoned a maester and dictated a careful letter, detailing the incident. He made sure to highlight the men's plan to foment trouble in the north, their unknown backers, and Frostfire's purely defensive reaction. He ended with a plea for unity in the face of the undead threat. Once sealed, he sent a raven south, praying it would reach Daenerys swiftly. And so they waited again, locked in a cold standoff. Patrols along the roads doubled, The castle's watchers peered into every shadow. Rumors brewed about southern conspiracies. Frostfire picked up on the tension, resuming its restless pacing. Bran offered only vague warnings about a storm of swords and shadows, while Tormund muttered that he missed the simpler days of just killing whites without worrying about who might take offense. One dawn, as Jon roamed the ramparts, Sansa rushed to find him, eyes wide. A raven arrived. It bears Daenerys' seal. She's coming. She'll be here within a fortnight, with an army. Jon's heart clenched. He looked out over the snowy plains, the wind whipping at his cloak. He pictured Daenerys' banners on the horizon, Drogon's shadow crossing the sky, the weight of old grievances and new suspicions. The vision filled him with dread. War or peace? Danger or salvation? He closed his eyes, inhaling the frosty air, remembering the vow he'd made to protect the living. "Very well," he said at last. "We'll prepare to receive the Queen once more. Let's hope we can avoid a second dance of dragons." Below in the courtyard, Frostfire let out a low, mournful roar, as though echoing his apprehension. The North braced itself again for the arrival of a Targaryen host, uncertain whether the future held fellowship or flames, and whether the realm would stand united against the creeping darkness, or tear itself apart in fresh violence. Jon gripped the cold stone of the rampart, gazing over the wintry landscape. Whatever came next, he would face it head-on. For Frostfire, for the North, for the fragile hope of peace, and for the duty that bound him to protect the living from any enemy, be it monstrous whites or the tangled ambitions of humanity.